Story 1. At dinner, my son said out loud, "At least Mom's new husband isn't a loser like you." I didn't say anything. The next morning, his car had disappeared and his college account was frozen. That night, my ex called me in panic. This happened about a month ago, and honestly, I'm still processing the whole situation. I never thought I'd be dealing with this type of drama at my age, but here we are. I'm 45 years old and divorced from my ex-wife Sarah about 3 years ago. We have a son together named Taylor who is 19 years old and in his second year of college. The divorce was complicated and Sarah made sure to poison Taylor against me as much as possible during the process. Sarah remarried last year to a guy named Brad who works in sales and thinks he's hot stuff because he drives a BMW and wears expensive suits. Taylor absolutely adores Brad and constantly compares me to him in ways that are not at all flattering to me. The thing is, I'm actually not doing badly in life. I work as an electrical engineer and make good money. I own my house outright and have decent savings, but I'm not flashy like Brad. I drive a practical sedan and dress normally. Sarah has convinced Taylor that this makes me a loser. During the divorce, Sarah fought me on everything, including child support and custody. She wanted maximum support and minimum visitation rights for me. The court didn't see it that way, and we ended up with shared custody and reasonable support payments. Part of the divorce agreement was that I would pay for Taylor's college expenses, including tuition, room, and board. This was actually my idea because I wanted to make sure Taylor had opportunities no matter what happened with the marriage. Sarah agreed to this arrangement. I've been paying approximately $30,000 per year for Taylor's college costs. Private university is expensive, but I wanted him to have the best education possible. I set up automatic payments for tuition and gave Taylor a credit card for other school expenses. Taylor has been increasingly disrespectful to me since the divorce. Sarah encourages this behavior and Brad does nothing to stop it. Family dinners when Taylor visits me have become exercises in patience while he makes constant comparisons between Brad and me. According to Taylor, Brad is more successful, more fun, and more generous than me. Brad takes Taylor on expensive trips and buys him designer clothes. Meanwhile, I'm just the guy who pays for his education and provides a boring, stable home environment. Taylor wanted a car for college and Sarah demanded that I buy him one. The divorce agreement didn't specifically mention a car, but Taylor kept pushing for one. Eventually, I agreed and bought him a decent used Honda that was reliable and appropriate for a college student. Taylor wasn't happy with the Honda. He wanted something flashier like Brad's BMW. I explained that a reliable used car was more practical for college and that he should be grateful to have any car. Taylor reluctantly accepted it, but complained constantly. The situation had been gradually getting worse for months. Every phone conversation became a list of the incredible things Brad had done or bought. Every weekend Taylor spent with me felt more like an obligation than quality father-son time. I tried to plan fun activities, but Taylor always found a way to compare everything to what he did with Brad. I remember one particular occasion a few weeks before the dinner incident when I tried to take Taylor fishing. It was something we used to do when he was younger and I thought it might be a good opportunity to reconnect. But throughout the entire trip, Taylor was complaining that Brad had a better boat and that his fishing trips on the lake were much more exciting. I couldn't enjoy even 5 minutes without Brad being mentioned. Sarah had also been intensifying her campaign against me. Every time Taylor came from her house, he brought new stories about how great Brad was. Sarah was clearly feeding this narrative, probably to make me feel bad or to justify her new relationship. What hurt me most was that I had been a good father. I never missed a baseball game, never missed a parent-teacher conference, and was always there when Taylor needed me. But now, suddenly, all of that didn't matter because Brad had more money to spend on flashy things. It was as if 18 years of dedicated parenting had been erased because I chose to drive a Honda Accord instead of a BMW. Recently, Taylor had been staying with me every other weekend, according to our custody arrangement. These visits had become increasingly tense because Taylor spent most of the time talking about how great Brad was and how much better his life was at his mom's house. The atmosphere in my house during these weekends had become almost toxic. Taylor would arrive on Friday night with an attitude, acting as if being in my house was a punishment. I tried to make conversation during dinner, asking him about his classes or his friends, but his answers were short and uninterested. It was clear he'd rather be anywhere else. What really frustrated me was the hypocrisy of it all. Taylor lived comfortably thanks to my financial support, but acted as if I were a burden in his life. His $30,000 per year tuition, his dorm room, his meal plan, his books, his clothes, all of that came from my hard work. But somehow in his mind, I was the villain of the story. Last month, Taylor came for his regular weekend visit. I had planned to take him to dinner at a nice restaurant because I wanted us to have quality time together. I thought maybe we could have a conversation without all the drama for once. I chose an Italian restaurant that I knew he liked, one where we had gone several times when he was younger. It was a place with good memories, and I hoped that might help improve his attitude. I made reservations for 7 p.m. and told him to dress nicely because we were going somewhere special. When we arrived at the restaurant, Taylor seemed to be in a better mood than usual. He commented that he liked the place and even smiled when the waiter took us to our table. For a moment, I felt hope that we could have a pleasant evening together. Dinner started well. We talked about his classes and his summer plans. Taylor seemed to be in a good mood, and I was hopeful that we could spend a nice evening together. That lasted about 30 minutes. He told me about an engineering project he was doing for one of his classes. And for the first time in months, he seemed genuinely excited about something related to his studies. I was proud to hear about his work and asked him questions about the technical details. For a few moments, it felt like the old days when we could have real conversations about things that mattered to him. But then Taylor started talking about a vacation that Sarah and Brad were planning to take him on during spring break. Some expensive trip to Europe that sounded like it cost more than most people earn in several months. Taylor went on and on about how excited he was. He talked about the places they would visit, the hotels they would stay in, the experiences Brad had planned. The way he talked about Brad was as if he were some kind of hero or mentor, not just his mother's new husband. I made the mistake of asking if Brad was paying for this trip or if it was coming out of Taylor's college fund that I provide. Taylor got defensive and said it wasn't my business how Brad spent his money. He said Brad was generous unlike some people. The conversation went downhill from there. Taylor started comparing Brad's generosity to my supposed stinginess. He brought up the car topic again and said Brad would have bought him something nice instead of an old Honda. He said Brad understood what Taylor needed while I just focused on being practical. I tried to change the subject, but Taylor was on a roll. He started listing all the ways Brad was supposedly better than me. Brad was more successful. Brad was more fun. Brad was more understanding. According to Taylor, Brad was everything a father should be. What hurt me most was the unfairness of his comparisons. Brad had been in Taylor's life for less than 2 years, and during that time he'd only had to be the fun guy. He hadn't been up all night when Taylor had a fever as a child. He hadn't spent hours helping him with his math homework. He hadn't been there for all the ups and downs of raising him. Brad had only had to show up with expensive gifts and exciting adventures. Meanwhile, I had been paying for everything important in Taylor's life, his education, his housing, his food, his health insurance. But somehow that didn't count because it didn't come wrapped in expensive gift paper. I tried to explain to Taylor that there were different types of support and that the financial stability I provided was an important form of care. But he didn't want to listen. In his mind, it was all about who could make the biggest gestures and who had more money to spend on fun. The tension at the table kept rising. Other diners began to notice we were having an argument. Taylor was raising his voice and I was trying to stay calm, but I could feel my patience running out. I had come to this restaurant hoping to reconnect with my son, and instead I was being attacked and publicly humiliated. The last straw came when Taylor said loud enough for other diners to hear, "At least Mom's new husband isn't a loser like you." He said it with this smug expression as if he were proud of putting me in my place. I sat there for a moment just looking at him. Other people in the restaurant had heard what he said and were looking at us. I felt humiliated and angry but didn't want to make a scene in public. The silence that followed was deafening. Taylor seemed to realize he had crossed a line, but his expression showed more defiance than regret. It was as if he were testing how far he could go, how much abuse he could make me swallow before I finally reacted. I just asked for the check, and we left in silence. The waiter, who had been serving our table all night, had clearly heard the comment. He gave me a sympathetic look when I handed him my credit card. Even a stranger could see how inappropriate Taylor's behavior had been. The ride home was uncomfortable. Taylor seemed to realize he had crossed the line, but didn't apologize. I dropped him off at his dorm and told him I'd see him in 2 weeks for his next scheduled visit. He just shrugged and walked away. That night, I sat in my house thinking about what Taylor had said. All the way home, his words echoed in my head. Loser. That's how his own son saw me. After 18 years of sacrifices, after working overtime to pay for his education, after being there for every important moment of his life, I was a loser in his eyes. I realized I had been enabling his disrespectful behavior by continuing to provide financial support while he treated me like garbage. Something needed to change. I had been so focused on being the good, stable father that I had forgotten to teach Taylor about respect and consequences. I spent most of the night awake thinking about all the ways I had failed as a father. Not by not providing for Taylor. I had done that excessively, but by not teaching him basic values about how to treat people who love and support you. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't had in years. I knew exactly what I had to do. I made some phone calls. First, I called the bank and canceled Taylor's credit card. The customer service representative asked if there had been fraudulent activity, and I explained that I was simply removing an authorized user from my account. It was a simple process since I was the primary account holder. Then, I called his university's treasurer's office and asked them to put a hold on processing any new charges to his student account until I could review them personally. Since I was the account holder and payer, this was within my rights. The university official explained that this would mean Taylor couldn't buy meals on the meal plan or access other services until the hold was lifted. Finally, I called the auto insurance company and removed Taylor's car from my policy. I also drove to Taylor's dorm and used my spare key to retrieve the Honda. It was parked in the student lot and I simply drove it home. Since the car was registered and titled in my name, and Taylor was only an authorized user, I had every legal right to retrieve it. Taylor had no ownership claim on the vehicle. As I drove the car back to my house, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. I didn't want to be doing this. I didn't want to be in a situation where I had to teach my 19-year-old son about consequences this way. But I had reached a point where words were no longer enough. By noon, Taylor's college account was frozen and his car had disappeared. His credit card stopped working when he tried to buy lunch. I imagined he was having a very confusing day trying to figure out what was happening. I didn't call Taylor to explain what I had done. I figured he was smart enough to put the pieces together eventually. If he wanted to treat me like a loser, then he could see what life was like without the loser's financial support. Later, while I was in my home office, I began to have doubts about what I had done. Part of me wondered if I had been too harsh, if I had overreacted to a young man's hurtful words. But then I remembered the expression on his face when he called me a loser. The way he had said it so casually, as if it were an accepted fact. I also thought about all the other moments of disrespect I had tolerated. The constant comparisons with Brad, the complaints about my gifts, the way he acted as if being in my house was a punishment. Taylor had been pushing boundaries for months, and I had been too worried about keeping the peace to establish real consequences. That night, my phone started ringing. First, it was Taylor calling, but I didn't answer. Then, it was Sarah calling repeatedly. I let those calls go to voicemail, too. I wasn't ready to deal with her drama yet. Sarah left several voicemails, each more frantic than the last. The first one was angry, demanding to know why Taylor's accounts were frozen. By the third voicemail, she was practically begging me to call her back because Taylor was having a breakdown. I could hear Taylor crying in the background of one of the messages. The reality of his situation had finally hit him. Without a car, without a credit card, without access to his college account, Taylor was experiencing for the first time what it meant not to have my financial support. I finally answered when Sarah called for the 6th time. She was hysterical, asking what I had done and why I was punishing Taylor. She said he was crying and didn't understand why his car and credit card weren't working. I explained very calmly that Taylor had made it clear he thought I was a loser who didn't deserve his respect. Since he felt that way, I decided he no longer needed financial support from someone he considered worthless. Sarah was speechless for a moment. Then she started screaming about the divorce agreement and my obligation to pay for Taylor's education. I reminded her that respect and basic human decency weren't too much to ask in return for $30,000 a year. Sarah tried to argue that Taylor was just a teenager and didn't mean what he had said. I pointed out that Taylor was 19 years old and in college. He was old enough to understand that actions have consequences and that you shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you. Then Sarah tried a different approach and started crying about how this would ruin Taylor's education. She said he couldn't afford college without my help and that I was destroying his future over hurt feelings. I told her Taylor should have thought about that before calling me a loser in public. The conversation ended with Sarah hanging up on me after I refused to immediately restore Taylor's accounts. I knew she would call me back when she realized I was serious about this situation. Taylor tried to call me several more times that night, but I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk to him until he was prepared to have a real conversation about respect and consequences. The text messages I received from Taylor that night were revealing. At first, they were angry and confused. "Why did you do this? This isn't fair. I need my car to get to classes." But as the hours passed and the reality of his situation sank in, the tone changed. The later messages showed more panic. "Dad, please answer. I don't understand what's happening. I can't buy food. My card isn't working. How am I supposed to get to work without a car?" For the first time, Taylor was experiencing the real consequences of his actions. The next day, Sarah called back with Brad on the line. Brad tried to play peacemaker and suggested maybe we could work something out. He said Taylor had learned his lesson and was very sorry for what happened at dinner. I told Brad that if he thought Taylor had learned his lesson, then he was welcome to take over paying for Taylor's college expenses. There was a long silence on the phone. Apparently, Brad's generosity had limits when it came to actually spending his own money. For all these months, it had been easy for him to be the fun, generous stepfather when someone else was paying all the important expenses. But faced with the prospect of paying $30,000 a year for Taylor's education, Brad's true nature came to light. Sarah came back on and started threatening legal action. She said the divorce agreement required me to pay for Taylor's education and that I couldn't just stop because my feelings were hurt. I told her to have her lawyer call my lawyer. The truth is the divorce agreement did require me to pay for Taylor's education, but it said nothing about tolerating abuse in exchange for that support. I was willing to argue in court that respect and basic decency were reasonable expectations for continued financial assistance. Over the next few days, I received calls from several family members who had heard about the situation. My mother called concerned about Taylor, but also understanding my position. She had noticed Taylor's disrespectful behavior toward me at family gatherings and had privately commented that something needed to change. My older sister was divided. On one hand, she was worried about Taylor's education and thought maybe I had been too harsh. On the other hand, she had witnessed firsthand how Taylor spoke to me and admitted that if one of her children had spoken to her that way, she would have reacted similarly. Some people thought I was being too harsh, while others said it was about time Taylor faced some consequences for his behavior. My brother said he supported my decision completely. He had witnessed Taylor's disrespectful behavior toward me and thought the kid needed a reality check. My younger brother shared a story about his own teenage son who had been acting similarly, though not as extreme. He told me he had been struggling with when and how to set boundaries and that my situation had helped him realize that waiting too long only made things worse. I also received some unexpected calls from colleagues and friends who had heard about the situation through the grapevine. A coworker whose son had gone through a similar phase told me how they had handled the situation and assured me that setting firm boundaries had ultimately improved his relationship with his son. Taylor finally called me directly 3 days after I froze his accounts. He was crying and said he was sorry for what he had said at dinner. He begged me to restore his car and credit card and promised he would be more respectful in the future. The conversation lasted almost an hour. Taylor sounded genuinely broken and remorseful. He told me about how he had had to borrow money from friends for food, how he had had to walk miles to get to his part-time job, how he had had to explain to his friends why he suddenly didn't have a car. But what impacted me most was when Taylor told me he had been thinking a lot about our relationship and realized he had been taking me for granted. He said he had never really considered everything I did for him because it had always been there as a constant in his life. I told Taylor that apologies were easy, but actions mattered more. I told him that if he wanted my financial support, then he needed to show me genuine respect, not just when he needed something but all the time. This meant no more comparisons with Brad and no more insults about my life choices. Taylor agreed to my conditions and seemed genuinely sorry for his behavior. I told him I would think about restoring his accounts, but that things were going to be different from now on. He would have to earn back my trust and financial support. After talking to Taylor, I decided to give him one more chance. I restored his college account so he could continue with his education, but kept the car and credit cards suspended. I told him he could earn those back by showing consistent, respectful behavior over time. I also had a conversation with Sarah about boundaries. I made it clear that if she continued to encourage Taylor's disrespectful behavior toward me, then I would permanently withdraw my financial support. She needed to choose between her revenge against me and Taylor's education. Sarah wasn't happy with this ultimatum, but realized I was serious. She agreed to stop undermining my relationship with Taylor and to encourage him to be more respectful. Whether she'll follow through remains to be seen. The conversation with Sarah was particularly interesting because for the first time in years, I had her full attention. Throughout the divorce process and after I had felt like my words didn't matter, like my feelings and perspectives were irrelevant. But when Taylor's education was at stake, suddenly Sarah was very interested in what I had to say. I established clear rules. No more disparaging comments about me in front of Taylor. No more encouraging comparisons between Brad and me, and no more undermining my parental authority. I told her that if Taylor came home after being with her and disrespected me, I would assume she had been feeding that attitude. Sarah initially tried to argue that she couldn't control what Taylor thought or said, but I pointed out that she had done a very good job influencing his opinions about me for the past 3 years. If she could make him hate me, she could also encourage him to respect me. The whole situation actually improved my relationship with Taylor in some ways. The shock of losing his car and credit card made him realize how much he depended on my financial support. He has been more respectful during our conversations and has stopped making constant comparisons with Brad. The following weeks were an adjustment period for everyone. Taylor had to learn to live on a much tighter budget. He could no longer go out to eat whenever he wanted or buy things impulsively. He had to be more strategic about when and where he spent money. His friends noticed the changes, too. Taylor told me later that it had been humiliating to have to explain why he suddenly didn't have a car or why he couldn't pay when they went out. Some of his friends were understanding, but others were less considerate, and Taylor experienced for the first time how social status can change when your financial circumstances change. Taylor is still living without a car and using cash for expenses. I've told him he can earn back these privileges by consistently showing respect and appreciation for what I provide. So far, he seems to be making an effort. Our phone conversations have changed dramatically. Where before Taylor seemed bored or resentful when we talked, now he seems more interested in maintaining a good relationship with me. He asks me about my work, about my weekend plans, about things he had never shown interest in before. He has started thanking me for things he used to take for granted. When I restored his college account, he called me specifically to thank me. When I sent him money for textbooks, I received a detailed text message explaining exactly what he needed the money for and thanking me for my support. Brad has been notably quiet since he learned that his generosity would be put to the test if I stopped supporting Taylor. It turns out it's easy to be the fun, generous stepfather when someone else is paying all the major expenses. Brad's true colors showed when he was faced with real financial responsibility. What really bothered me about Brad wasn't that he was rich or successful. I respect people who work hard and succeed. What bothered me was his willingness to undermine my relationship with Taylor while benefiting from my financial support. It was hypocritical of him to criticize my lifestyle while Taylor lived comfortably thanks to my work. Now that Brad understands he might have to pay for the lifestyle Taylor had been living, his attitude toward me has changed. He's no longer the arrogant antagonist he used to be. In fact, in our most recent phone conversation, he almost sounded conciliatory, as if he finally understood that I wasn't the enemy in this situation. The experience taught me that financial support should come with expectations of basic respect. I had been so focused on providing for Taylor that I forgot to require that he treat me with decency. As a father, it was my mistake and it needed to be corrected. I've had time to reflect on the mistakes I made as a father. Not the mistakes of not providing enough, I had done that excessively, but the mistakes of not teaching appropriate boundaries and behavioral expectations. I had been so worried about being the good father after the divorce that I had allowed Taylor to treat me in ways I would never have tolerated from anyone else. During the weeks that followed, I began to establish other boundaries, too. I told Taylor that if he wanted to talk to me on the phone, he needed to give me his full attention. No social media or watching TV while we talked. I told him that when he came to visit me, I expected him to participate in family activities instead of locking himself in his room complaining. At first, Taylor resisted these new boundaries. He had been used to being able to ignore me while still receiving financial benefits. But when he realized I was serious about consequences, he began to adapt. A turning point came about a month after the original incident. Taylor asked me if he could come home one weekend, which wasn't his scheduled time because he wanted to talk to me about something important. This was completely different from his previous behavior, where visits felt like obligations he had to fulfill. When Taylor arrived that weekend, he sat me down and had a real conversation with me about how he had been feeling. He explained that he had been angry with me about the divorce and had been taking that anger out on me in ways that weren't fair. He said he had used Brad as a way to hurt me because he knew the comparisons pained me. It was the first time Taylor had been completely honest with me about his emotions in years. He admitted he had been resentful of me for not fighting harder for the marriage, although he intellectually understood that the divorce hadn't been entirely my fault. He had been carrying this anger for years and had been directing it toward me in destructive ways. He also told me about the pressure he had been feeling from Sarah to take sides in the divorce. He said he had felt like he had to choose between his parents and that it had been easier to blame me because I wasn't trying to manipulate him emotionally the same way Sarah had been doing. This conversation was painful but necessary. It helped me understand that Taylor's behavior hadn't just been disrespect. It had been about unprocessed emotional pain and divided loyalties. But I also made it clear to him that understanding the reasons behind his behavior didn't excuse it. I explained to Taylor that the divorce had been difficult for everyone, including me. I told him about some of the struggles I had faced as a single father, the nights I had spent worrying about him, and how his words and actions had affected me. It was the first time I had been vulnerable with Taylor about my own feelings. We also talked about Brad and the role he had been playing in our conflict. Taylor admitted he had been using Brad as a weapon against me, comparing me unfavorably to him because he knew it would bother me. He acknowledged that this had been unfair because Brad and I had completely different roles in his life. I explained that I had no problem with Taylor having a good relationship with Brad. In fact, I encouraged it, but that relationship didn't have to come at the expense of our own father-son bond. I told him there was room in his life for both of us as long as there was mutual respect. Over the following weeks, Taylor began to follow through on his promises of more respectful behavior. Our phone conversations became more substantial. Instead of superficial updates about his life, we began having real discussions about his goals, his struggles, and his plans for the future. Taylor also began showing genuine interest in my life. He asked me about my work, my hobbies, and even my dating. It was refreshing to have a son who seemed to see me as a complete person rather than just a financial provider. He has started thanking me for things he used to take for granted. When I restored his college account, he called me specifically to thank me. When I sent him money for textbooks, I received a detailed text message explaining exactly what he needed the money for and thanking me for my support. About 6 weeks after the original incident, Taylor asked me if he could earn back his car by showing me he had changed. I told him I was pleased with his progress, but that I wanted to see consistency over a longer period before fully restoring his privileges. Taylor accepted this without complaint, which was another sign of his growth. The old Taylor would have argued or gotten moody. The new Taylor seemed to understand that earning back trust took time and consistent effort. I decided to implement a system where Taylor could earn back privileges gradually. I told him that if he continued showing respect and appreciation for another month, I would give him back the car, but with restrictions. He would have to keep his grades above a certain level, he would have to continue being respectful, and he would have to contribute to the cost of insurance with money from his part-time job. This structure gave Taylor clear goals to work toward and gave me a way to reward good behavior while maintaining expectations. It also taught him that privileges come with responsibilities, something that had been missing from his upbringing. Meanwhile, my relationship with Sarah also improved, though it remained tense. Once she realized I was serious about withdrawing financial support if she continued to undermine my relationship with Taylor, she changed her approach. She no longer made disparaging comments about me in front of Taylor, and even went so far as to encourage him to be more respectful toward me. Sarah and I had a long phone conversation one night where we finally talked honestly about how the divorce had affected Taylor. She admitted she had been so angry with me that she had lost sight of what was best for our son. She acknowledged that encouraging Taylor's disrespect toward me hadn't been productive for anyone. She didn't apologize directly for her behavior, but she acknowledged that we needed to work together as parents instead of using Taylor as a pawn in our conflicts. It was a small but important step toward a more functional co-parenting relationship. Brad also adjusted his behavior. He stopped making comments about my lifestyle choices or parenting decisions. In the few interactions we had, he was polite and respectful. I think he realized that antagonizing me wasn't in his best interest, especially considering Taylor depended on my financial support. Some people might think I was too harsh, but I disagree. Taylor is an adult who needs to understand that relationships are reciprocal. You can't treat someone badly and then expect them to continue supporting you financially just because they're related to you. The experience also taught me some important lessons about parenting after divorce. I realized I had been so focused on not being the bad father that I had lost sight of the importance of teaching boundaries and consequences. I had been compensating for divorce guilt by being too permissive with Taylor. I also learned that financial support without expectations of respect can actually be harmful to young adults. Taylor had been living in a bubble where his actions had no real consequences. By withdrawing my support, I forced him to confront the reality that his choices affect his relationships and opportunities. Looking back, I wish I had established boundaries earlier instead of letting the disrespect continue for so long, but better late than never. Taylor learned that actions have consequences, and I learned that providing financial support doesn't mean accepting abuse. The outcome has been positive overall. Taylor is more respectful. Sarah is less inclined to undermine me. And Brad has learned that his stepfather role comes with limitations. Sometimes tough love is the only way to reset unhealthy family dynamics. About 3 months after the original incident, Taylor had demonstrated enough consistent change for me to feel comfortable restoring most of his privileges. I gave him back the car, but with the condition that he had to pay for his own insurance and gas. I also gave him a new credit card, but with a much lower limit and the understanding that it would be removed immediately if he abused it. Taylor accepted these conditions with gratitude rather than complaints. This response showed me more than any words could that he had truly learned from the experience. The old Taylor would have argued about the restrictions or acted like it was unfair. The new Taylor seemed to understand that he had earned these privileges back and that keeping them required continued responsible behavior. Our weekends together were completely transformed. Instead of Taylor counting the minutes until he could leave, he began planning activities we could do together. We started going fishing again, something we hadn't done in years. We also started working on house projects together, which gave him opportunities to learn practical skills while we spent quality time. What impressed me most was when Taylor started inviting his friends to the house. He had spent years acting like being at my house was a punishment, but now he seemed comfortable bringing his social world into my space. His friends were respectful and polite, and Taylor had clearly spoken well of me to them. One night, while Taylor and some of his friends were watching a movie in my living room, I overheard a conversation that made me smile. One of his friends had commented on how cool my house was, and Taylor had responded with pride about some of the improvements we had made together. It was the first time in years I had heard Taylor speak positively about his time with me. The car is still in my garage from the early days after the incident, but no longer as a symbol of punishment. Now it's a reminder of how much things had changed. Taylor asks about when he can earn back the privilege of having it on campus, and I tell him he can have it back when he's shown 6 months of consistent and respectful behavior. So far, he's making progress, but he still has work to do. The system I established has worked well. Taylor understands that his privileges are directly connected to his behavior. When he's respectful and responsible, he receives more freedom and support. When he makes mistakes or reverts to old patterns, there are immediate but fair consequences. The whole situation was a wake-up call for everyone involved. Taylor learned that financial support isn't unconditional. Sarah learned that her actions affect Taylor's future, and I learned that setting boundaries is necessary, even with family members. I hope Taylor takes this lesson seriously and becomes a better person because of it. He has potential to be successful and kind, but he needed to learn that treating people well is as important as achieving your goals. The relationship between Taylor and Brad has also improved paradoxically. Once Taylor stopped using him as a weapon against me, he was able to develop a more authentic relationship with his stepfather. He no longer feels the need to exaggerate how great Brad is to hurt me, so he can genuinely appreciate the positive qualities Brad brings to his life. Brad, for his part, seems to have developed more respect for my role in Taylor's life. When faced with the reality of what it actually costs to support a college student, he gained new appreciation for the sacrifices I've been making. Our interactions are now cordial, even respectful. This experience also strengthened my confidence as a father. For years after the divorce, I had been doubting my parenting decisions, wondering if I was too strict or not fun enough compared to Taylor's new family. But establishing and maintaining firm boundaries showed me that I had good parental instincts. I had just been too scared to use them. Looking toward the future, I'm optimistic about my relationship with Taylor. We've built a foundation of mutual respect that didn't exist before. Taylor understands that I value our relationship enough to fight for it, even when that means making difficult choices. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest love you can show is setting firm boundaries. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is responsibility. Taylor needed to learn that his actions have consequences and that relationships require mutual respect. It was a painful choice for both of us, but necessary. The transformation hasn't been perfect. Taylor still makes occasional mistakes, and I still have to remind him about expectations and boundaries. But the fundamental difference is that he now understands there are standards he must meet and real consequences if he doesn't. More importantly, Taylor has begun to see our relationship as something valuable worth protecting. He no longer takes my support and presence in his life for granted. I've learned that relationships require effort and respect from both parties. This experience has made me a better father, I believe, and has helped Taylor become a better young adult. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, but sometimes the most important lessons come from the most difficult moments. Taylor has the potential to be successful and kind, and this experience helped him understand that treating people well is as important as any other goal he might have in life. Now on to the next story. Story 2. My son lied to his teacher and got me arrested. Yesterday, my phone rang at 2 a.m. It was the police. "Ma'am, we have your 6-year-old son, Tommy, at the station. He walked here by himself saying his mommy heard his baby sister." I shot out of bed. "What? Tommy's in his room sleeping, and I don't have a baby sister. Ma'am, please come down to the station immediately." I ran to Tommy's room. Empty bed, front door wide open. At the police station, Tommy was wrapped in a blanket, shaking. The moment he saw me, he screamed, "Don't let her take me. She killed my sister." My heart stopped. The officers looked at me like I was a monster. "Tommy, buddy, what sister? It's just me and you. Remember?" He kept screaming about his baby sister, Sarah. How I made her go away forever. Forever. How he was scared I'd make him go away, too. The officers separated us immediately. They put me in a cold interrogation room while Tommy sobbed in another room down the hall. The detective sat across from me. "Ma'am, your son walked half a mile in the middle of the night barefoot to report you for murder. 6-year-olds don't make up stories like that. There is no other child. It's just been me and Tommy since his dad died 2 years ago. Then why is your son describing his sister's crib in detail? And why does he have bruises on his back?" My stomach dropped. Last week, Tommy broke my grandmother's expensive vase. I spanked him. I disciplined him. Once he broke something, the detective wrote that down. So, you do hit him. I stared at him. I don't know. They brought in a child psychologist. Through the one-way glass, I watched Tommy tell his story again, his little hands moving as he described. She had tiny fingers, Tommy whispered, and Mommy got really mad because she cried too much. Then one night, Mommy put her in a black bag and took her away. The psychologist asked, "Where did Mommy take her?" "To the place where people go away forever." "And Tommy, does Mommy hurt you too?" "She hits me when I'm bad, just like she hurt Sarah." My hands were shaking. They searched my house at 4 a.m., tore apart every room, called hospitals asking about missing children, pulled my phone records, bank statements, everything, nothing. But Tommy's story never changed. Hours passed. The detective came back looking frustrated. "We can't find any evidence of another child. No birth records, no hospital visits, no purchases of baby items. Explain why he's terrified of you." Couldn't. At sunrise, they brought Tommy back in. The psychologist sat with us both. "Tommy, can you tell me more about when your sister lived with you?" Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "It was before Daddy died. Mommy was really happy then. She sang songs and bought tiny clothes. She showed me the room she made all pink and pretty. My blood went cold. Then one day, Mommy was crying and screaming. There was blood everywhere and the baby went away." The psychologist looked at me. "Ma'am, is there something you need to tell us?" But before I could answer, the door opened abruptly. An older woman entered the room, her eyes red from crying so much. It was my ex-husband's mother, Tommy's grandmother. She hadn't spoken to me since the funeral, blaming me for her son's death. "My God, Tommy!" she screamed, running toward the boy. "Grandma is here, dear." Tommy threw himself into her arms, sobbing even louder. "Grandma, she killed Sarah. She killed my little sister." The woman stared at me with a hatred that made me shrink back in my chair. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "I always knew there was something wrong with you. My son told me about the pregnancy, about how you didn't want the baby." The psychologist leaned forward. "Ma'am, what pregnancy are you referring to?" My mother-in-law continued glaring at me. "She got pregnant when Tommy was 4 years old. David was so happy talking about having a girl, but she pointed an accusing finger at me. She said she wasn't ready. That one child was enough." I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The memories began to return, hazy and painful. The unplanned pregnancy, the arguments with David, the depression that consumed me when I discovered I was expecting another child. I lost the baby," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It was a miscarriage. In the 6th month." The detective leaned forward. "And where did this happen?" "At the hospital." I shook my head slowly. "At home. There was so much pain, so much blood. David was working. It was just me and Tommy. I called the ambulance, but my voice failed. When they arrived, it was too late." Tommy lifted his face from his grandmother's shoulder. "I saw the blood, Mommy. I saw you crying. And the baby was in a black bag when the men took it away." His words hit me like punches. He had seen everything. A 4-year-old child had witnessed the worst moment of my life. The psychologist was writing furiously. "And afterwards, how did you cope with the loss?" I closed my eyes, remembering the days that followed. David devastated. Me in deep depression. Tommy confused and scared. David wanted me to seek help, therapy. But I couldn't. I couldn't talk about it. Not even with him. "So, you simply pretended it never happened." My mother-in-law's voice was loaded with contempt. "You erased my granddaughter from existence as if she had never mattered." Her words cut me deeply because there was truth in them. After the loss, I had pushed everything to the back of my mind, refusing to talk about Sarah, refusing to cry for her in front of Tommy. The detective looked at Tommy, then at me. "This would explain why there are no recent records. But it doesn't explain why your son is so afraid of you now." Tommy shrank in his grandmother's arms. She gets angry when I talk about Sarah. She yells at me and says Sarah never existed. But I remember her. I remember when she moved in Mommy's belly. I felt tears burning my eyes. For 2 years, every time Tommy mentioned his sister, I cut him off, told him to stop making up stories. I thought I was protecting him from pain, but I was only increasing his confusion. Tommy, I began, but he turned away, hiding in his grandmother's chest. The psychologist closed her notepad. I'm going to recommend a complete psychological evaluation for both of you. It's obvious there's unresolved trauma here. She looked directly at me. Ma'am, your son didn't lie. He told his truth through the eyes of a child who witnessed a tragedy and was never allowed to process it properly. My mother-in-law stood up, still holding Tommy. I'm going to petition for custody of him. I won't let you continue hurting my grandson. Panic hit me like a cold wave. You can't do that. He's my son. But even as I protested, I knew I had lost Tommy. The moment I denied Sarah's existence, the moment I chose silence instead of healing, the detective sighed heavily. For now, Tommy will stay with his grandmother until we resolve this situation. You're not being charged with homicide, but there are issues of emotional neglect that need to be investigated. He stood up, signaling the end of the interrogation. I suggest you seek professional help immediately. As they left the room, Tommy looked back one last time. His eyes, so much like his father's, were filled with a sadness no child should carry. Bye-bye, Mommy, he said softly, as if he were saying goodbye forever. Those words echoed in my mind as I drove back home in the early morning hours. The house was exactly as the police had left it. Drawers open, sofa cushions thrown on the floor, books scattered. But what caught my attention most was the silence. For the first time in 6 years, I was completely alone. In the following days, my life transformed into a public nightmare. The story had leaked to the local press. 6-year-old child runs away from home to report mother for murder, and reporters began showing up at my door. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had always been cordial, now looked at me with suspicion and had given an interview saying she always found it strange that Tommy seemed so scared sometimes. Lies and half-truths began to spread like fire. Someone said they had heard screams coming from my house. Another neighbor claimed to have seen bruises on Tommy weeks ago. Every trip to get mail or buy groceries became an ordeal of suspicious looks and whispers. On Tuesday, I received a visit from social services. The social worker, a middle-aged woman with penetrating eyes, searched my house with a thoroughness that made me feel like a criminal. She photographed everything: Tommy's room, the kitchen, even the pantry. There are reports that the child frequently appeared malnourished, she said, making notes on her clipboard. That's ridiculous, I protested. Tommy always ate well. He's thin by nature like his father was. But she didn't seem convinced. Every word I said was noted, analyzed, distorted. When she saw the room that had been prepared for Sarah, her eyebrows rose. This room was prepared for a baby. I explained about the lost pregnancy, but she just wrote more things down, her face expressionless. Every object in the house became potential evidence against me. The disassembled crib in the attic, the baby clothes stored in boxes, even the ultrasound photos I had hidden. Everything was documented as if they were pieces of a sinister puzzle. On Thursday, I tried to see Tommy at my mother-in-law's house. I knocked on the door for 10 minutes before she finally opened it, keeping it barely ajar, as if I were a physical danger. He doesn't want to see you, she said coldly. He has nightmares every night, waking up screaming about blood and black bags. Please, I begged. He's my son. I just want to explain. But she was already closing the door. Your son is traumatized because of you. You had your chance and you wasted it. The door slammed in my face, leaving me standing on the porch like a stranger in my own son's life. That night, my sister Lisa found me drinking wine alone in the dark living room. You need to stop this, she said, taking the bottle from my hand. Drinking won't solve anything. But what she didn't understand was that the pain had become unbearable. Every night I dreamed about Sarah, about the moment I lost her, about the despair in Tommy's eyes when he witnessed everything. I destroyed everything, I whispered to my sister. First I lost Sarah, then David died in the accident, and now I've lost Tommy. Everything I touch turns to ashes. Lisa tried to comfort me, but her words sounded empty. How could she understand? She had a perfect family, healthy children who slept safely in their beds. On Friday, I received a call from Tommy's school. The principal wanted to inform me that Tommy had told several classmates that his mother was a murderer. The other children were afraid of him, and parents were calling to complain. "We understand you're going through a difficult time," the principal said in a careful voice. "But Tommy is clearly in psychological distress." Later that day, my lawyer called with bad news. Tommy's grandmother got a temporary restraining order. "You can't approach the child until the custody hearing." I felt as if they had ripped my heart from my chest. "But he's my son," I screamed into the phone. "How can they prevent me from seeing my own son?" They based it on the testimony of a child psychologist who said Tommy is in a state of genuine terror regarding you. My lawyer explained in a tired voice. "They argue that your presence is harmful to his emotional well-being." The call ended with him telling me not to do anything that could worsen my situation. But how could it get worse? I had already lost everything. That night, I violated the restraining order. I drove to Tommy's school and stayed in the car, watching the children play in the courtyard. When I saw Tommy, my heart broke. He was alone, sitting under a tree, not playing with anyone, even from a distance. I could see he was thinner, that his shoulders were hunched as if carrying the weight of the world. One of the teachers must have seen me because she approached Tommy and said something. He looked in my direction, and for a moment, our eyes met. I expected him to run to the fence to shout my name like he used to. Instead, he got up slowly and walked into the school without looking back. It was at that moment I understood the true extent of what I had done. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, and I knew I was fighting a losing battle. During the weekend, I tried to prepare myself mentally to officially lose my son, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the courtroom. My mother-in-law had hired an expensive private lawyer, a man who dissected every aspect of my life with the precision of a surgeon. He presented photos of Tommy with bruises from the spankings I had given, school reports about behavioral changes after David's death, and testimonies from neighbors about screams coming from the house. Each piece of evidence was carefully orchestrated to paint the portrait of a negligent and potentially dangerous mother. The lawyer also brought evidence of my alcohol consumption. In recent months, neighbors reported finding empty wine bottles in the defendant's trash with alarming frequency, he said in a cold, professional voice. Mrs. Henderson will testify that she frequently saw the defendant stumbling while getting mail during the day. I wanted to scream that they were lies, exaggerations, but part of me knew there was truth there. After David's death, I really had used alcohol to numb the pain. When it was my turn to speak, I tried to explain about the lost pregnancy, about how the pain had blinded me to Tommy's needs. But my words sounded weak even to me. "Your Honor," said my lawyer, "my client acknowledges she made mistakes, but she lost a child and her husband in a very short period. She was dealing with unprocessed grief." The judge, an older man with tired eyes, looked at me over his glasses. "Ma'am, I understand you've been through significant losses, but a 6-year-old child running away from home in the middle of the night out of fear of his mother is extremely concerning." He leafed through some documents. "The psychological report indicates that your son genuinely believes you represent a threat to his safety." That's when they brought Tommy to testify. My heart shattered when I saw him enter the room, wearing clothes I didn't recognize, firmly holding his grandmother's hand. He had lost even more weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. When our gazes briefly crossed, he quickly looked away, as if I were something too terrible to see. The judge addressed Tommy with a gentle voice. "Tommy, can you tell me where you would like to live?" Without hesitation, Tommy pointed to his grandmother. "With Grandma? She doesn't yell at me when I talk about Sarah." His words hit me like knives. "And your mommy?" the judge asked carefully. Tommy shook his head vigorously. "She gets angry. She says Sarah never existed, but I remember her. When it was my turn to speak directly to Tommy, I approached him carefully, as if he were a frightened animal. Tommy? Sweetheart, you know that Mommy loves you, don't you? He looked at me with eyes that seemed older than they should be. Did you love Sarah too? He asked in a small voice. The question hit me like lightning. There it was. The question he had been trying to ask for 2 years, and which I had refused to answer. Yes? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I loved Sarah very much. I still love her. For a moment, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes, but then he shook his head. Then why did you say she never existed? Why did you get angry when I talked about her? His voice was loaded with pain no child should carry. I had no answer. How do you explain to a 6-year-old child that you were so broken by pain that you preferred to pretend she didn't exist? The verdict was announced an hour later. Full custody to the paternal grandmother with supervised visitation rights for me if I completed a rehabilitation and intensive therapy program. This decision is not permanent, the judge said, but it's what's best for the child at the current moment. But I knew it was permanent. Tommy had been forced to choose between his emotional safety and our relationship, and he had chosen safety. I left the courthouse knowing I had lost not only the battle, but also any real chance of getting my son back. That night, I tried to bring some of Tommy's things to him. When I arrived at my mother-in-law's house, she didn't even open the door. "Leave the things on the porch," she shouted from inside. "And don't come back here." I left the boxes on the porch and walked back to the car. Through the living room window, I could see Tommy playing on the floor, seeming more relaxed than I had seen him in months. It was then that a terrible realization settled in my mind. Even though it hurt to admit, Tommy was really better off without me. He had found peace away from the mother who had failed him when he needed her most. This realization should have destroyed me completely. But instead, a cold and disturbing clarity settled in. If Tommy was better off without me, if my presence only brought trauma and confusion to his life, then maybe it was time to ensure he would never have to worry about me again. I returned home that night with a strange and dangerous determination. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper and began writing letters. One to Tommy explaining everything I had never been able to say. One to Lisa thanking her for trying to save me. One to my mother-in-law asking her to tell Tommy about Sarah when he was older. But as I wrote, the phone rang. It was my lawyer, his voice tense and urgent. "There's something you need to know," he said. "Tommy's grandmother gave an interview to the local newspaper. She's claiming that you confessed to having intentionally terminated the pregnancy." My pen stopped mid-sentence. "That's a lie," I whispered. "I lost Sarah. It was a miscarriage." But my lawyer sighed heavily. "She's saying you admitted to taking something to interrupt the pregnancy and that David never knew. That Tommy witnessed you getting rid of the evidence." I felt as if the world was collapsing around me again. She's making this up. Why? Tommy is already with her. She already won. But then I understood. It wasn't enough for her to have Tommy. She wanted to destroy me completely. Erase any possibility of me ever getting my son back. The next day, the local newspaper headline screamed, "Mother confesses to induced abortion. Son witnesses body disposal." The story invented by my mother-in-law had spread like fire, transforming my personal tragedy into something sordid and criminal. Neighbors who had previously only whispered now looked at me with open disgust. Someone threw eggs at my window during the night. I hired a private investigator, driven by a rage I didn't know I possessed. If she wanted to play dirty, I would discover all her secrets. And it didn't take long to find them. The perfect woman who presented herself as the ideal grandmother had some skeletons in the closet. History of alcoholism in her youth, 2 psychiatric hospitalizations after her husband's death, and most interesting, a child abuse accusation that had been dropped 20 years ago. But when I sat with this information, looking at the proof of her imperfection, I realized something disturbing about myself. I was sitting there planning to destroy the only stability Tommy had found since his world collapsed. I was willing to traumatize my son again just to win a battle against a woman who, in the end, just wanted to protect her grandson. It was at that moment I truly saw who I had become. I wasn't a grieving mother trying to get her son back. I was a woman consumed by bitterness, willing to hurt anyone, including Tommy, to relieve my own pain. The truth was that my mother-in-law was right about one thing. I was dangerous to Tommy. I burned the investigator's documents and returned to my letters. But this time, I wrote the complete truth about how I had chosen denial instead of helping Tommy process the loss. About how my own unhealed wounds had infected our relationship. About how my love for him had become toxic, suffocating, harmful. Lisa arrived the next morning finding me dressed and made up, the letters organized on the table. "Where are you going?" she asked, suspicious. "I'm leaving," I replied simply. "Tommy has a chance to be happy and healthy with his grandmother. And I'm not going to destroy that by staying around." "You can't give up on him," Lisa protested. "He's your son." But I shook my head. "No, Lisa. Being a mother isn't about possession. It's about doing what's best for your child, even when that means stepping away." I picked up my keys and headed for the door. "And where are you going?" she shouted behind me. I turned one last time. "Somewhere where I can learn to be the person Tommy deserved to have as a mother. Even if it's too late for him, it's not too late for me." I drove through the city one last time, passing by Tommy's school, by my mother-in-law's house, by all the places where we had made memories before everything collapsed. At the traffic light near the grandmother's house, I saw Tommy playing in the front yard. He was laughing, chasing a butterfly, looking like a child should look. For a moment, I considered stopping, calling him, trying to explain one more time. But then I saw my mother-in-law come out of the house and join the game. Tommy threw himself into her arms with total abandon, the trust he used to have with me. They looked happy, complete, a family that worked. I accelerated when the light turned green, leaving behind the life I had destroyed. In the passenger seat were the letters I would leave at the post office before departing. Explanations Tommy could read when he was older if he wanted to. Apologies that came too late to change anything, but that needed to be said anyway. 3 hours later, I was on the interstate highway driving toward a rehabilitation clinic in another state. During the first weeks there, I could barely function. The doctors diagnosed me with severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, in addition to alcohol dependency. Dr. Martinez, my main therapist, was a patient man who didn't accept my attempts to minimize what had happened. "You can't heal something you refuse to acknowledge," he told me during our third session. "Tell me about Sarah." For the first time in 2 years, I talked about my daughter without defending myself, without making excuses. I talked about how I had loved touching my belly and feeling her move, about how David used to talk to her through my skin. I also talked about the night I lost her, how I was alone when the contraction started too early, how Tommy had found me in the bathroom bleeding and screaming, holding something small and still in my hands. "What did you say to him that night?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. The tears came without warning. I told him not to look. I screamed for him to get out of the bathroom. But he saw everything. He saw when I wrapped Sarah in a towel. He saw when the ambulance took her away in a black plastic bag. It was then that I fully understood why Tommy had used those specific words. He wasn't making up a story. He was telling his traumatized version of real events. Months passed. Through intensive therapy, I began to understand how my own childhood had prepared me to fail as a mother. My family never talked about feelings, about pain. I had learned that strong feelings were something to be suppressed, not processed. Gradually, I began writing letters to Tommy that I would never send, searching for the words I had never been able to say. During this time, Lisa called me weekly with updates about Tommy. He was doing well in school, making new friends. My mother-in-law had enrolled him in therapy. "He asks about you sometimes," Lisa told me in one call. "He asks where you went." What they told him was that I was sick and needed to get better, that maybe one day I would return. In the 5th month of treatment, I received a call that changed everything. It was my lawyer. "Your mother-in-law died," he said bluntly. "Sudden heart attack last week." I felt as if someone had kicked me in the stomach. "And Tommy?" I asked in a trembling voice. He's temporarily with a foster family. Social services are trying to find close relatives. But he hesitated. You're officially his closest relative now. They want to know if you're interested in resuming custody. I hung up the phone and went to find Dr. Martinez immediately. They want me to come back for Tommy? I told him, my voice strangely calm. How do you feel about that? He asked. I thought for a long moment, terrified, but also hopeful. If I really learned something here, if I really healed, maybe I can be the mother he deserves this time. Dr. Martinez nodded slowly. You've made extraordinary progress, but raising a traumatized child will be the biggest test of your recovery. We spent the rest of the session discussing what this would mean, the challenges we would face. Tommy has also changed in these months, he reminded me. He's lost not only you, but now also his grandmother. You'll both be starting from scratch. A week later, I was driving back to my old city, this time not running away, but returning to face the consequences of my choices. The house was exactly as I had left it, dusty and empty. But this time, the silence didn't haunt me. It was a blank canvas, a chance to start again. When I finally saw Tommy at the social services office, he was even thinner, even quieter. His eyes carried a new layer of pain, the loss of another important person in his life. Hi, Tommy, I said softly. He looked at me for a long moment. You came back, he said simply. Yes, I replied. I came back, and this time, if you'll let me, I'm going to stay. He considered this in silence. Do you still get angry when I talk about Sarah? He asked. No, I said with absolute certainty. Actually, I would very much like to talk about Sarah with you, about how she was special, about how we both loved her. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time, cautious hope. It might take me a very long time to trust you again, he said with a maturity that broke my heart. I understand, I replied. I have the rest of my life to earn your trust again. When we left the social services building together, Tommy hesitated before taking my hand. His touch was tentative, cautious, but it was a beginning. We had lost so much time, caused so much pain to each other. But for the first time in years, I believed we could find our way back to each other. Not as the mother and son we were before, but as the healed people we could still become. Now on to the next story. Story 3. I'm a millionaire and my childhood friend demanded I give her a house as a wedding gift. But when I refused, she kicked me out in front of everyone. Our friendship started in the most innocent way. I was 7 years old when we moved to the street where Bianca lived. I was one of those quiet kids, always with a book in hand or staring at the world from the living room window. My mom used to say I was mature for my age, but honestly, I was just lonely. And it was Bianca who pulled me out of that shell. She showed up at my door one afternoon holding a lollipop and flashing a huge smile, saying all the kids on the block were playing hide and seek and that I had to come. From that day on, she became part of my life like she'd always been there. We grew up side by side, sharing secrets, notebooks, dreams, and of course, all the frustrations that come with adolescence. Bianca was always the bold one, the talkative one, the charismatic one. She was the one who'd start conversations, make up the stories for our games, and push me to do things I probably wouldn't do on my own. And me? I was the listener, the observer, the one who held it all inside and offered a shoulder when she cried over some boy who ignored her or a bad grade she got in school. She had this way of existing that was intense, like the world was supposed to revolve around her. And honestly, maybe it did. Bianca was stunning in a way that drew eyes, and she had this charm that could twist any adult around her finger. I remember watching her sweet-talk teachers into giving her second chances on tests or convincing mall security guards to let us into R-rated movies. She could manipulate people with a smile, and me? I just watched, fascinated and yet always with this strange little ache in my chest. Like no matter how close we were, I'd never be quite enough next to her. Still, I never questioned our friendship. She gave me what I needed most, companionship, and I gave her what she seemed to want, loyalty. We grew up swearing we'd never lose touch, that we'd be each other's maids of honor, that our kids would be best friends. She said I was the only one who truly understood her, and I believed her. Deep down, I clung to the idea that Bianca needed me, that beneath all that confidence was someone fragile. But now I see it clearly. I was just useful, and being useful is not the same as being loved. In high school, our paths started to split. I landed scholarships, buried myself in books, and chased this vague dream of turning my life around. Bianca, she was on a different wavelength. She wanted parties, relationships, followers. She said studying was important, sure, but that I worried too much about the future. Relax, she'd say, flashing that easy grin. The universe will sort things out for us. And I believed her, even when she started dating guys who treated me like I didn't exist, even when she left me out to hang with cooler crowds, even when I felt invisible. She always came back, always apologized, told me I was special, and I forgave her because to me, Bianca was family. After high school came this silent break. I got into a public university in another state with a full scholarship and left with a suitcase and a mountain of fear. Bianca stayed behind, said she'd figure something out locally, tried makeup artistry, then wanted to be an influencer. She started a bunch of things but never really followed through. Yet somehow she always sounded so sure that she'd make it big. During college we talked less, but she still messaged me now and then to say she missed me, that she was proud. Whenever I came back home on breaks, we'd grab coffee. She'd light up when she saw me, like no time had passed. But everything had changed. While I lived broke in shared housing, pulling all-nighters and eating ramen, Bianca was still at home, hanging with the same people, talking about the same things. When I graduated and launched my first startup, a small educational tech platform that took off 2 years later, she was one of the first to congratulate me, said she was proud of me, and I believed her. Of course I did. When I started making real money, things got weird. She'd joke about how I was rich now, how I should pay for dinner, how I owed her a girl's trip to Europe. I laughed, thought it was just banter. But over time those comments felt heavy, like they were dipped in something I couldn't name. Envy, bitterness, or just a warped idea of what wealth meant. She'd say, "It's nothing for you." And maybe it wasn't. Maybe I didn't mind picking up the bill, but what bothered me was the tone. The way it felt expected, like I owed her something for succeeding. Still, when she told me she was getting married to a guy she'd met less than a year ago on an app, I was the first to celebrate. She was glowing, told me she wanted me as her maid of honor, said the day wouldn't feel right without me there. And I said yes, of course. I thought maybe we were finally reconnecting, that this time our friendship would bloom again. Stronger, more mature, more real. But that was the moment everything started to fall apart, and that part I'll tell you in the next chapter. The wedding preparations felt like something out of a low-budget romantic comedy. Bianca was excited in an almost childlike way, sharing mood boards, decoration ideas, dress sketches, song lists, photo shoot concepts, like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life, and honestly, she had. But beneath all that enthusiasm, there was something off. It wasn't just joy. It was as if she wasn't trying to live a dream, she was trying to prove something. Maybe to others, maybe to herself. She officially asked me to be her maid of honor during a private dinner. Just the two of us. I had picked the restaurant and, of course, paid for it like always. She raised her glass of sparkling wine and told me I was the only real friend she had left and that it wouldn't feel right starting this new chapter without me standing beside her at the altar. I smiled. In that moment I was genuinely touched. Despite everything we had been through, the distance, the weird shifts in our dynamic, there was a part of me that still wanted to believe the Bianca who used to call me her sister was still there. I accepted without hesitation. A few weeks later, she invited me to lunch at her parents' house. It would be the first time I'd meet her fiancé, Rodrigo. He had a warm personality, talkative, sociable, maybe a little too much. From the moment I walked in, I felt his eyes on me, not in a creepy or disrespectful way, but in this focused, calculated kind of curiosity, like he was trying to figure me out. We started with light topics, how they met, their habits, honeymoon plans. But before long, the conversation shifted. "So, how did you get into the startup world?" Rodrigo asked, swirling his wine glass with a faint smirk. "Bianca told me you became a millionaire out of nowhere." I laughed gently. trying not to show how much I hated that phrase. Out of nowhere. Like the sleepless nights, the panic, the endless work meant nothing. It wasn't out of nowhere, I replied calmly. I studied hard, got a scholarship out of state, worked during college. Later, I developed an education project for public schools focused on accessibility. It started small, but after an angel investor came in and I built a few key partnerships, it really took off. Today, we support over 100,000 students. Rodrigo seemed genuinely impressed. He started asking more technical questions: business model, scalability, potential for international expansion. It was the kind of conversation I loved, especially since no one from my old circle ever asked me about that side of my life. But while he grew more engaged, I noticed Bianca growing quiet. At first, she pretended to be into it. Forced smiles, the occasional "that's amazing." But soon it was obvious she wasn't enjoying it at all. Her leg was bouncing under the table. She kept checking her phone. She'd interrupt with random, irrelevant comments. "She works too much, doesn't she?" she said with a chuckle that barely masked something sharper underneath. "I don't think I could even handle waking up early every day, let alone running a company." Rodrigo laughed politely but didn't respond. He just looked at me, and I could tell he was paying attention, not just to what I said, but to the way Bianca was acting. Then, during dessert, he said, "I'm honestly blown away by your story. You built something incredible from scratch. That's rare. So many people are born into wealth and do nothing, and this is real success." The comment, though sincere, struck a nerve in Bianca. She laughed, but it was one of those short, cold laughs that doesn't reach the eyes. "Yeah, some people are just born lucky," she said, giving me a tap on the shoulder. I always say that about her, born under a lucky star. Meanwhile, I'm over here struggling to pay for the wedding catering, and it's not like my fiancé is rich either. She tried to make it sound like a joke, but the bitterness clung to every word. Rodrigo attempted to lighten the mood with something goofy, but it was already clear the vibe had shifted. Driving home that night, I couldn't shake the strange weight in my chest. For years, I had convinced myself that my success wouldn't come between us, that she was truly proud of me. But at that lunch, it felt like her mask slipped, just for a second. And what I saw in her eyes was unmistakable jealousy, and maybe a bit of resentment. Not because of Rodrigo, but because of who I had become. What I didn't know was everything that was still about to happen. The months leading up to the wedding were, to put it mildly, a test of patience. Every week brought a new drama, a new demand, a new over-the-top idea. Bianca dove headfirst into her bride era, like it was a sacred mission. And as much as I tried to keep a light-hearted attitude, I started to feel like a poorly paid extra in a show I never auditioned for. Right after the engagement announcement, she created a WhatsApp group called Team Bride and added all the bridesmaids, including me. From the group description, no complaining, just living the BB dream. I already knew this was going to be a circus. And sure enough, within days, she began sending out spreadsheets, 3 Google Docs to be exact. One with support tasks. One bridesmaid assigned to hold the train of the dress, another to keep her lipstick fresh for photos, another to monitor hair and shine, as if we were in a Hollywood production. Another document covered the details for a bachelorette trip where we were all expected to pay for our transportation, lodging, and split a custom-themed cake. But the final spreadsheet was the real kicker, the gift list. Except it wasn't just a wedding registry, it was a full-on luxury catalog, an adult wish list disguised as tradition. A 5-door fridge, a 12-seat modular sofa, a real Persian rug, a voice-activated air fryer, a custom-upholstered king bed, an 85-inch TV, a robot vacuum with Wi-Fi. Every single item on the list was over $2,000. One link led to a French dinnerware set priced at nearly $5,000. Another was for a wall-mounted wine cooler. One of the bridesmaids joked in the group chat, "So, where's the normal silverware?" Bianca replied almost instantly, "Oh girls, we already have the basics. This list is just for those who want to really invest in our future. If you can't, just give what your heart tells you." Sugar-coated manipulation. And deep down, I knew exactly who that was aimed at. She hadn't said it directly, but it was clear. The rich friend, the successful one, the one who supposedly didn't even notice when money left her account. She expected me to pick the most expensive item on the list to make a grand gesture, to be a shining example, to prove once again that I was willing to pay for my place in her life. But this time, I wouldn't. I took a deep breath and messaged her privately, "Hey Pia, I saw the gift list. I don't feel comfortable with the prices. I'm here to celebrate with you, but I hope you understand I'm not here to furnish your house on my dime." She took a few minutes to reply. When she did, the message came sharp and passive. "Wow, didn't expect that from you. I thought you, of all people, wouldn't care about price. But hey, it's fine. Everyone gives what they can and wants to." That last line stuck with me like a splinter. In the days that followed, the group chat turned colder toward me. A few bridesmaids started making vague comments about how some people are more involved than others. One even asked, half-jokingly, "So, is everyone chipping in for the split for their honeymoon suite?" I didn't answer. I withdrew because at that point I wasn't a friend anymore. I was a credit card with a dress code. The week of the wedding, I almost backed out, but I didn't. Maybe because of old loyalty, maybe pride, maybe some naive part of me still believed she'd remember who I was, not what I could give. The wedding day arrived. It was set in a rented estate in the mountains. Full Pinterest-style rustic chic decor, gourmet food trucks, a custom cocktail bar, and even a giant LED screen with their initials blinking in gold. I showed up early as requested. I wore the required dress color. I got my hair done, did the photos, smiled for the camera. I played the part. Bianca looked beautiful, stunning actually. The dress was perfect, her hair flawless, her entire aura glowing. But her eyes weren't the eyes I remembered. There was no warmth, just tension, like a volcano waiting for the cue to erupt. During the getting ready portion, she barely spoke to me, didn't include me in the side chats, the giggles, the special moments. I was there, but not part of it. Right before we lined up to walk the aisle, she glanced at me, gave a tight smile, and whispered, "I hope today at least you're really present." A quiet jab disguised as grace. I didn't reply. I walked, held my bouquet, took my place at the altar. The ceremony felt like a performance for the cameras, for the guests, not for love. Still, I stayed for what we were, not for what we'd become. But the worst was still to come. Later, at the reception, after the first dance, the emotional speeches, the family photos, Bianca took the mic. She thanked the bridesmaids, her magical fairies, as she called us. She brought each one to the stage, praised them, hugged them, until it was my turn. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "And finally, my most reserved bridesmaid," she said, locking eyes with me. "The one who's always too busy to reply, but she made it here today. The one who thought our gift list was a little too much. But hey, they say love isn't about money, right?" A wave of awkward laughter rippled through the room. "Still," she added with a dramatic pause, "thank you for coming, even if you didn't bring a gift." Silence. In front of everyone, her family, her friends, the cameras, the entire guest list. She humiliated me. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. But I said nothing, not then, because my answer was still on its way. I wasn't happy anymore, not even a little. I had spent the whole day pretending, smiling for photos, laughing politely, toasting like I actually wanted to be there. But inside I was drained, exhausted, and increasingly disgusted with how performative everything had become. The wedding didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a production, a giant glitter-covered stage where the bride played the lead role and everyone else was just a well-dressed extra. But even with all that, I never expected this. It was already late in the evening. The music had softened. The guests were a little tipsy. The lighting was romantic. The perfect setup for the final act of Bianca's show. She got up on the small stage again, this time hand in hand with Rodrigo, wearing the kind of grin that said she was about to drop something big. She raised the mic and did her signature pause for effect routine. "Everyone, I know tonight has already been perfect, but there's still one more surprise." The crowd murmured. The DJ lowered the volume. "We want to announce the most special gift we received. Something beyond our wildest dreams." I felt something twist in my gut. A chill, a warning. We've been gifted a house. Gasps, applause. People shouted, "No way!" and "Oh my God!" and started clapping like seals. I froze, dead silent, frozen, watching. Yes, a house. Our very first home together. A symbol of our future, our love, our family. But the most beautiful part, she looked at Rodrigo and then at the crowd, is how the gift was decided. I started to feel sick. It was a surprise organized by my amazing bridesmaids. They all voted anonymously, of course, on who among them was best suited to give this gift. And the one chosen was. Her eyes locked with mine. I knew it. I knew what was coming. Our lovely, brilliant, successful millionaire maid of honor. Everything stopped. Music, conversations, breathing, the world stopped. People turned to stare at me. Phones were pulled out. Whispers began. Bianca clapped. Rodrigo looked at me with that same smug expression he wore during that lunch. And then she said, "Let's give her a huge round of applause for this incredible act of generosity." The crowd erupted, and I sat frozen in disbelief, in rage. A few people around me patted my shoulder. "Wow, a house? That's amazing. I didn't know you were that close." She really went all out. No, no, no. I stood up, walked slowly to the stage. Not to smile, not to hug, but to stop the madness. I took the mic from Bianca's hand, and my voice came out calm, too calm. I didn't give anyone a house. The room fell into a stunned silence. Rodrigo looked confused. Bianca froze. No one told me. No one asked me. No one voted. This was not discussed with me, and I'm not going to stand here and let anyone assume that just because I have money, I owe anyone something like that. Bianca laughed nervously, trying to play it off. "Oh, come on. It was symbolic. Just our way of showing appreciation." Symbolic? A house? No. Let me be clear. I am not anyone's mother. I'm not here to fund someone else's adult life. You want a house? Work for it like I did. Cry for it like I did. Build it from nothing like I did. There were phones recording, at least 3 people, I saw them. Bianca's face twisted. She grabbed the mic back from me. You're unbelievable. Selfish. Cold. After everything I've done for you over the years, this is how you show up? You think you're better than everyone, right? Always the smart one, the rich one, the important one. Her voice was rising, her mask was slipping. You know what? Get out. Get out of my wedding. You're no longer welcome here. Go back to your penthouse or your startup or whatever the hell you care about, because you clearly don't care about real people. People were murmuring. Some were awkwardly laughing. Others just watched, stunned. I looked around. I saw the eyes, the cameras, the judgment. And for a second, I almost felt embarrassed. Almost. But then something inside me snapped. And snapped clean. I didn't say another word. I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I grabbed my purse and I walked out, step by step, head held high. Outside, I heard the music come back on like nothing had happened. But something had happened. A line was crossed, a friendship was buried, and a storm, one she never saw coming, was already brewing. Because I don't scream, I don't humiliate, but when I strike back, you never see it coming. And Bianca, she had no idea that my response was already on its way. I thought it would end there, that public humiliation, that calculated exposure in front of everyone, would be the final chapter in a friendship that, truthfully, had been dead for a long time. But the world doesn't work like that. Not when phones are recording. Not when social media thrives on real drama. Especially one soaked in arrogance, betrayal, and a hint of revenge. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to dozens of messages. Some from old friends who had seen the videos, others from numbers I didn't even recognize. What started as a trickle of support quickly turned into a storm on TikTok. A video of Bianca kicking me out of her wedding had already passed 400,000 views before noon. The title, "Bride Kicks Out Millionaire Maid of Honor for Not Buying Her a House." The comments were a wave of outrage. She wanted a house? That's not friendship, that's extortion. The maid of honor handled that like a queen. I would have thrown the mic at her face. She didn't want a friend. She wanted a bank account. On Instagram, screenshots from our bridesmaid group chat were being shared. Someone, and to this day I don't know who, had leaked messages where Bianca was pressuring the bridesmaids, making passive-aggressive jokes, and clearly stating that I had a moral obligation to contribute more. People saw it all and they took my side. Within 48 hours, I was no longer the cheap maid of honor. I had become a symbol of boundaries, of self-worth, of stop using successful women as ATMs. And Bianca? She became a meme. Me at my friend's wedding waiting for her to buy me an iPhone 15 Pro Max. Bianca, if you want a sofa, go sit down at the store with some humility. She was tagged in everything. She lost control of the narrative. On the third day after the wedding, she texted me. It was cold, passive-aggressive, and dripping with resentment. Thanks for turning my wedding into a public circus. Hope your little empowerment campaign is treating you well. Never thought you would be the one to stab me in the back like this. I read it, breathed, and replied calmly. I didn't do anything except tell the truth. What you did to me in front of everyone. That's not something you do to anyone, let alone someone you claimed was your childhood friend. So please, Bianca, forget me for good. She didn't reply, and for months there was silence. I moved on with my life. I traveled, closed a new round of investments, got invited to speak on podcasts, in interviews, at events about boundaries, toxic friendships, emotional abuse. And for the first time in years, I had peace, real peace. Until he showed up. Rodrigo, her husband. His message came out of nowhere. A DM on Instagram, private account, no more couple photos, no wedding ring in his profile pic, just a simple message. Hi, I'm not sure I should be doing this, but I wanted to apologize. That whole situation. It went way too far. I was never okay with how she treated you. I hope you're doing well. I stared at the message for a few minutes. I thought about deleting it, blocking him, ignoring it. But something in me, that part of me that doesn't forget, opened it. I responded a few days later, short, blunt. I'm fine, and yes, it went too far. And then he kept writing. We started chatting carefully. He said Bianca had been spiraling, that the marriage wasn't what it looked like online, that the facade was crumbling. And that's when I saw it. The crack, the fracture, the opportunity. Not for reconciliation, but for something far more satisfying, justice. I began replying more often, always polite, respectful, supportive, but never too open. He started to vent about her control, the public scenes, the pressure, how she treated him, how she treated everyone. She's obsessed with her image. She stalks your posts, freaks out if I even like anything remotely related to you. She talks about you like you're some villain. But honestly, I don't see it anymore. Every message gave me more. He told me how she treated the house staff, how she manipulated his mother, how she lied to friends about me, saying I'd always been jealous of her. And I listened. I made notes. I waited, because I didn't want to just walk away. I wanted her to feel what I felt. Not through screaming, not through public drama, but through consequences. And Rodrigo, he was handing me the ammunition piece by piece. The plan was still forming. She had humiliated me in front of 200 people, made a spectacle of me like I was nothing. Now it was my turn. And when the time came, she would learn the hard way. Some people walk away, others come back. And when they do, they come back stronger, sharper, and ready. One quiet night, after another round of messages with Rodrigo, the idea came to me. Up until that point, I'd been listening, collecting everything, his rants, his complaints, his so-called truths. He seemed sincere, vulnerable, hurt. But something didn't sit right. He kept saying Bianca was controlling, obsessed, toxic, that their marriage was a disaster, that he was stuck, tired, done. But he stayed. And more than that, he kept getting closer to me. His messages started crossing lines. You've always been different. She never appreciated you. If only I'd met you first. I was naive. I'd heard it all before. And that's when it hit me. Things between them weren't nearly as bad as he claimed. He just wanted to flirt, to worm his way into my life, make me feel like the better option, the alternative, the woman he should have been with. And suddenly I saw my opening. Not just to get revenge for what Bianca had done to me on her wedding day, but to make her see the truth for herself, to make her feel what it's like to be betrayed, blindsided, exposed, not by me, by her own husband. I kept the conversation going. Pleasant, controlled. He kept inching forward, pushing boundaries, complimenting me, calling me beautiful, saying he thought about me. Until finally, he made his move. We should meet. Just talk. No pressure. I played along. Told him maybe. Suggested something discreet, private. He didn't even hesitate. There's a motel near downtown. It's quiet. I could be there around 6. I took screenshots. Every message, every word, date and timestamped. I saved the old ones, too, where he trashed Bianca, called their marriage fake, said she was a nightmare. Then, I created an anonymous email to Bianca. Subject: You deserve to know the truth. Attached the screenshots. In the body of the message I wrote, if you want to see for yourself, he made plans with her at Motel Onyx today, 6 p.m. It's your choice. No name, just one sentence at the end. From someone who knows how it feels to be lied to. I got to the place early. Hoodie, sunglasses. I parked across the street at a gas station. My phone camera ready, propped up, focused. At 5:57, she arrived. Alone, tense, stone-faced, phone in hand. She walked through the entrance like she owned the place, with the fury of someone who already knew the truth and came to confirm it. At 6:03, Rodrigo pulled in, adjusting his shirt, fixing his hair, looking way too relaxed for someone about to walk into a trap. He stepped inside, clueless, until he saw her. Bianca, arms crossed, standing dead in the middle of the hallway. And the moment their eyes met, pure gold. He froze. She exploded. She shoved him, screamed in his face, held up the phone with the messages. You thought I wouldn't find out? You thought I'm stupid? You were going to cheat on me again. He tried to explain, stuttering, backing up, but she wasn't having it. She slapped his chest, cursed, yelled louder. The front desk staff just stared, frozen, unsure of what to do. A live betrayal unraveling right there in the open. I filmed every second. Sound clear, image focused. Later that night, I posted it. Anonymous account. Caption: From the wedding of the year to the motel of the truth. The internet did the rest. People recognized her instantly. Comments came in waves. Wait, is this the house wedding girl? Well, at least now she has somewhere to live alone. Rodrigo walked straight into his own funeral. This is karma in 4K. Within 24 hours, Bianca deleted every one of her accounts. Rodrigo too. But it didn't matter. The story was already out there, the video was everywhere. The divorce was swift, no split assets, no mediation. She was kicked out of Rodrigo's family home in shame, labeled unstable by neighbors who heard the screaming match, and her friends gone. No one wanted to be associated with her. She was left with no husband, no social circle, no dignity, and worst of all, no way to erase the truth because the internet never forgets. I never spoke to either of them again. I didn't need to. I kept the original video not to repost, but to remind myself. Sometimes revenge doesn't need to be loud, it doesn't need violence. It just needs timing, clarity, precision. Bianca destroyed herself. All I did was hand her a mirror. Months went by. The dust settled, the video stopped circulating, social media moved on to other scandals as it always does. But I remained in peace. Not because I had gotten revenge, but because I had finally closed a door that should have been shut long ago. The truth is, our friendship had been dead for years. All that remained was expectation, entitlement, envy dressed as closeness. And when I let that go, I felt lighter, freer. I returned to my life, to my calm days, to my quiet nights, to the freedom of not being anyone's emotional or financial crutch. And then, out of nowhere, she came back. Bianca. Alone, no filters, no glowing eyes. She messaged me, just a simple request. I don't want anything. I just need to talk. I almost ignored her, but curiosity won. We met in a quiet little cafe in the middle of the afternoon. Neutral ground. No audience. No tension. Just silence. She looked like a different woman. Smaller, tired, like someone who had finally been forced to look at herself. She sat across from me and said, I came to say I'm sorry. I stayed quiet. She went on. For everything. For how I treated you at the wedding, for what I said. For how I made you feel. I lost control. I thought you owed me something just because we were friends. I thought having you around meant I deserved more, and I ruined it. I lost you, I lost my marriage, I lost everything. Everyone left, and I don't blame them. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. She didn't know. She had no idea I was the one who set up the motel meeting, that I had been the anonymous email, that I was the one who filmed it all and let the world see it. In her mind, I was still the girl she humiliated, the one who just walked away. And I let her believe that, because sometimes silence is justice. I took a breath and answered, Bianca, what you did to me wasn't just petty. It was cruel. You made me a spectacle. You used our friendship like a stage prop, expecting me to pay for your life just because you couldn't afford it yourself. And when I said no, you tried to destroy me publicly. You didn't just hurt me. You disrespected everything we'd ever shared. She looked down, tears welling up. I didn't stop. You confused friendship with convenience. And when I didn't give you what you wanted, you threw me away. But what you built on appearances, it collapsed hard. And that's on you. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. You didn't lose everything because people are mean. You lost it because you were greedy, selfish, and arrogant. And now maybe you want redemption, but it won't come from me. Her eyes filled with tears. She was shaking, but I felt no pity, only clarity. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and ended it with one final truth. I don't want a friend who sees me as a bank account. I want peace, and that's what I found the moment you left my life. You never knew how to be a friend, and now you'll have to learn how to be a human being. Goodbye, Bianca. I walked out without looking back. Never spoke to her again. She still has no idea that I was the one who ended her perfect marriage. But that's not my problem anymore. Because that's how I ended a childhood friendship. Not out of hatred, but out of self-respect, to protect myself from her greed, from her manipulation, from everything she chose to become. Now on to the next story. Story 4. I was at the mall looking for a new pair of sneakers when I saw my cousin Noah walking out of the Apple store holding a fresh bag with that signature white box. I hadn't seen him since Christmas, so I called out, "Hey man, when's the family trip happening? I've been waiting on an update for weeks." He blinked, tilted his head slightly, then gave me a half-smile like I just told a bad joke. "Wait, you don't know?" he asked. "We went last month. It was awesome." I just stared at him. "What do you mean you went last month?" He looked around, clearly realizing something was off. "Yeah, Turks and Caicos, mid-June. It was me, Aunt Rachel, Uncle Gary, your sister, your mom, everyone. Didn't they tell you?" I swear for a full 5 seconds, my brain stopped working because I'd paid $4,000 toward that vacation and nobody had told me a thing. That's when I pulled out my phone. Before I go deeper, I should back up and explain how I got here, because this whole mess didn't just start at the mall. My name's Austin. I'm 27 and I work as a freelance UX designer. It's a decent gig, pays the bills, lets me work from home or wherever I want. I live alone in a small but nice apartment outside San Diego. I'm not rich, but I'm careful with my money. I budget. I track my expenses. I save. So, when my mom called me back in March and said the extended family was planning a once-in-a-decade vacation to Turks and Caicos, I hesitated. She said everyone would be pitching in, that it would be a big bonding experience, and that my cousins were excited to spend time together again. I hadn't seen most of them in years. At first, I told her I couldn't afford to just drop thousands on a vacation, especially when I had no idea what the schedule would look like or if I'd have deadlines. She said not to worry, that the Airbnb had to be booked fast because it was a group rate and everything else would fall into place. "Just send your share now and we'll handle the details. It's just a deposit. We'll loop you in once the planning starts." I should have asked more questions. I should have gotten something in writing, but this was my mom. And despite our rocky past, which I'll get into, I wanted to believe this was her trying to reconnect, trying to include me. So I Venmo'd her $4,000. Now, growing up, our family was always a little lopsided. I was the oldest of 3. My younger sister, Brooke, is 25, and our brother Caleb is 21. Caleb's still in college, kind of doing his own thing. But Brooke's the golden child. Always has been. She was the cheerleader, the straight-A student, the one who knew how to smile at the right people and say the right things. Meanwhile, I was the awkward kid who preferred books and computers. I wasn't rebellious or anything, just quiet, different. My parents, especially my mom, always made it clear Brooke was this social glue of the family. I was the reliable one, the helper, the one who got asked to fix the Wi-Fi or drive grandma to the doctor. And somehow that helpful role stuck even after I moved out. Brooke lives 2 blocks away from my parents now, still riding the wave of that favorite status. She works for a small marketing firm that my uncle owns, so it's not exactly like she climbed a mountain to get where she is. But you'd think she'd solved world hunger with the way my mom talks about her. Every holiday, every phone call, every text starts with something like, "Brooke got promoted," or "Brooke's planning the baby shower for your cousin," or "Brooke's doing something wonderful again." Isn't that amazing? I learned to tune it out after a while. It wasn't worth arguing. But this vacation, this was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be a family event. Equal footing. Everyone together. Except apparently everyone was together. Just without me. Back at the mall, I stood there frozen, staring at my screen like it could somehow explain what Noah just said. I opened the family group chat, scrolled up. Nothing. A couple birthday posts. Some pictures from Easter brunch. A meme Brooke sent about air fryers. No mention of a trip. No photos, no planning, no return dates, no "hey, we're here" or "can't wait to see you." Nothing. Then I realized I'd been moved to replies only. I couldn't even send a message. I asked Noah, "You sure they all went?" My mom, Brooke, everyone. He nodded. "Yeah, man. I mean, I assumed you were busy or something. Your mom said you couldn't make it last minute." She said I couldn't make it. On the drive home, my head was spinning. I kept replaying the timeline. March, the deposit. April, silence. May. I texted Mom to ask if there were updates and she replied, "Still figuring things out. Nothing confirmed yet." Then in early June, she went quiet. Said she was helping Brooke with a project and would call me back. She never did. I'd been buried in client work at the time and I didn't think much of it. Figured the trip had been delayed or something fell through. But now it was clear they'd planned the whole thing behind my back, paid for it with my money, and I'd been cut out. I called my mom that evening. She didn't pick up. I texted, "Hey, just ran into Noah. He said the trip already happened." No reply. A full hour later, I got a response. "Can we talk tomorrow? I'm about to head out." No apology, no explanation, just a casual deflection like she'd forgotten to water the plants or missed a dentist appointment. My hands were shaking. I didn't know if I was more angry or hurt. And beneath all of it was this sick feeling in my gut, like I'd been made into a fool by the people who were supposed to care about me most. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering every moment that now felt like a setup. The rushed payment, the vague updates, the radio silence, and suddenly I couldn't stop asking questions. Was this Brooke's idea? Did my mom lie to cover for her? Did everyone just go along with it? Did they laugh about it? Did they sit on a beach drinking cocktails, knowing full well I'd paid for a trip I wasn't even invited to? And if so, why? I started digging. Social media, old texts, hidden posts. I wasn't prepared for what I'd find next because it turns out the truth was a whole lot worse than I thought. And I was going to make sure they regretted every single part of it. The next morning, I woke up with that restless, burning feeling in my chest, the kind that doesn't let you breathe right. I hadn't really slept. My mind had been racing all night, going over conversations, timelines, tone shifts. Every memory was now colored by suspicion. I kept wondering when it had really started, the part where I became disposable. At 9:17 a.m., my phone finally rang. "Austin," she said. Her voice just a little too calm, like she was trying to keep the upper hand in a conversation she already knew would go badly. "I saw your text." "Yeah," I said flatly. "So Turks and Caicos happened already. Everyone went." She sighed, that long breath she always used when she was about to blame me for something. "I didn't want you to feel left out, honey. That's why I didn't say anything." I blinked. You didn't want me to feel left out, so you left me out? What are you even saying right now? It's not that simple, she said quickly. Plans changed. Things got booked faster than we thought. Brooke took charge of the planning and we had to make some decisions. I assumed you were too busy with work anyway. You always say you're swamped. I gave you $4,000 and we used it toward the Airbnb, she said, like that somehow justified everything. You're still part of it. Technically. Technically, I repeated, stunned. So, I helped pay for a vacation I wasn't even invited to. And you're just okay with that? There was a pause. We didn't think you'd mind, she said softly. Brooke said you wouldn't care. Of course she did. There it was. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Brooke said I wouldn't care. That's when the dots started connecting in my head like little landmines going off one by one. Brooke's name kept popping up. Brooke took charge. Brooke said this. Brooke decided that. And Mom just went along with it like she always did. Suddenly, I realized this wasn't just a miscommunication or some rush decision. It was a deliberate choice, a hierarchy I'd always known existed, but never fully acknowledged. And the worst part, they didn't even try to lie convincingly. I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. I needed answers, real ones. So, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into Facebook. My family isn't super active on social media, but Brooke, she lives for it. I scrolled through her posts, her tagged photos, her stories. Most were locked to close friends, but I found a few things she'd slipped up on. A boomerang of champagne glasses clinking on a yacht, a blurry sunset shot over turquoise water, a bikini mirror selfie captioned, Vacay mode. Nothing explicitly said Turks and Caicos, but anyone with eyes could see it. Then I checked Noah's page. He'd tagged the location. Bingo! I started reverse engineering the timeline. They left around June 12th. The photos picked up around the 13th and stopped on the 19th. 7 days. A full week. Brooke had even posted a quote the day they returned. Family. Where life begins and love never ends. That one made me laugh out loud. The irony could have powered a city block. But I wasn't just angry. I was gutted. That quote, that trip, it was all performative, a show for themselves and their friends. And I wasn't just excluded. I was used. Financially, emotionally, and worst of all, without the decency of a heads up. Still, there was a part of me, maybe the naive part, that needed to know the full scope. Was it just Mom and Brooke? Or was the rest of the family in on it, too? So, I texted my uncle, my dad's younger brother, Uncle Mark. He was always the more grounded one, stayed out of drama. Hey, I wrote. We haven't talked in a while, but I heard you guys went on the trip already. Did you know I wasn't invited? He replied 3 minutes later. What? I thought you canceled. Your mom said you had a deadline and couldn't go. I even asked about you when we got there. She said you sent the money as a favor. As a favor. I stared at the screen. My heart was pounding in my ears. My mom had lied to everyone. Everyone. She told them I backed out, told them I offered the money as a gesture, like I was some generous outsider funding their bonding experience. And that's when the betrayal really landed. Not just being left out, not just the money, but being reframed in everyone's mind as someone who just didn't care, who gave his spot away like it was nothing. They'd erased me and rewritten the story. I spent the rest of that day alternating between pacing my apartment and typing up every detail I could remember, every interaction, every slip-up. I was building a mental case file, not because I was planning revenge, not yet, but because I needed the truth laid out in front of me. I needed to see the pattern, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't even the 10th. Growing up, I'd been sidelined in subtle ways for years. Birthday parties where my cake was forgotten. Christmas mornings where Brooke got the newest iPhone and I got socks. Group photos where I was the one taking the picture. College graduation. Brooke got a dinner and a custom cake. I got a text that said, "Proud of you, kiddo." I'd spent most of my life telling myself it wasn't intentional, that I was just quieter, more reserved, that they loved me, just differently. But now I knew better. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was favoritism with teeth. Later that week, I tried calling Brooke. She didn't answer. Instead, I got a text. "Hey, crazy busy right now. Can we catch up later?" I replied, "I know about the trip. You all went with my money." No response. The next day, I called my dad. Now, my parents are divorced, have been since I was 14. Dad and I aren't super close, but we keep in touch. He moved to Arizona after the divorce and didn't usually get involved in Mom's family events. He answered on the second ring. "Austin, what's up?" "I just found out the family went to Turks and Caicos last month," I said, skipping the pleasantries. There was a pause. "Yeah, I heard something about that. Your mom said you were all going." "They went without me." He was silent again. "You're kidding." "Nope. I paid for part. They left me out. Lied to everyone. Said I couldn't go." His voice dropped. "Austin, I'm so sorry." That was the moment I realized how rare those words were from anyone in my family. "I'm so sorry." Not an excuse, not a dismissal, just acknowledgement. And it hit harder than I expected. "They've always done this," I said. "I just never saw it for what it was." He sighed. "Your mom's always had blind spots, especially when it comes to Brooke." I didn't want to say anything, but I noticed it when we were still together. I thought maybe it would change over time. It didn't. "I can see that." He paused, then added, "You didn't deserve that. You've always been a good kid, Austin. Better than most." I didn't cry, but something in my chest cracked open a little. That tiny bit of validation, that was more than I'd gotten from my mom in years. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a while. Then I opened a new document on my laptop and started writing. Not just a journal, not just a list. I was building a plan because I wasn't going to be the quiet helper anymore. And whether they saw it coming or not, this time I was going to make sure the story ended differently. I didn't talk to my mom again for almost 2 weeks after that. It wasn't some conscious act of revenge. I just couldn't. Every time I saw her name on my phone screen or got a text notification from her that said something bland and hollow like, "Hope work is going well," my stomach tightened. It wasn't even anger at that point. It was fatigue. I was emotionally spent. You ever feel so used that your brain stops trying to rationalize it? That's where I was. Done pretending it was a misunderstanding. Done replaying her words to see if maybe I was the one being too sensitive. Deep down, I knew I wasn't. But despite how drained I felt, the silence gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. Space, mental clarity. No more surprise guilt trips. No more half-truths from Brooke. No more being treated like an afterthought in my own family. And in that silence, I started to hear something I hadn't heard in a long time. My own voice. I won't lie and say I bounced back overnight. The first few days after everything came to light were heavy. I was embarrassed. I stopped checking the family group chat entirely. I even deactivated my Facebook for a bit because seeing their smiling vacation photos made me physically sick. Every picture felt like a postcard from a world I'd been deliberately exiled from, one I helped fund. I couldn't stop thinking about that detail. That I paid for them to laugh and drink and toast each other under the Caribbean sun, while I was stuck in my apartment eating microwave pasta and wondering when they'd finally loop me in. But when you hit that low, the kind where you can't even pretend anymore, something strange happens. You stop waiting for someone else to save you. The first thing I did was look at my finances. I opened my budgeting app and stared at the minus $4,000 transaction from March. It was a painful red line across an otherwise decent month. I'd been saving to upgrade my home office, new chair, better webcam, maybe even dual monitors. But that money had vanished without a trace, and it hit me that I had nothing to show for it. Not a single grain of sand between my toes, not even a keychain. That same night, I opened LinkedIn and quietly updated my freelance portfolio. I hadn't refreshed it in over a year. My UX design work had always been steady, mostly word-of-mouth clients, small businesses, app developers, the occasional startup. But I realized I'd been coasting, partly out of comfort, but partly because I'd never really believed I could take it further. I wasn't flashy like Brooke. I didn't have connections, and I wasn't someone who naturally networked. Still, something in me clicked. I spent the next 3 nights reworking my case studies, adding video walkthroughs, and even recording a short intro pitch for my website. I reached out to past clients for testimonials and published a series of design breakdowns on Medium. I wasn't sure what would come of it, but it felt good to finally invest in myself instead of in people who would never return the favor. Then something unexpected happened. A startup founder in San Francisco found one of my Medium articles and emailed me asking for a consult. He was launching a productivity app and loved the way I explained user flow psychology. We jumped on a call the next day. 2 weeks later, I signed a $9,000 contract to design their entire onboarding experience. I won't sugarcoat it. I stared at that signed contract like it was a hallucination. Not because I didn't think I was worth it, but because for the first time someone else did. Someone I'd never met looked at my work and said, "Yeah, this guy knows what he's doing." That contract became a turning point. The confidence boost it gave me was more valuable than the check. I started waking up earlier, taking real care in how I presented myself, not just to clients but to myself. I replaced my wobbly desk chair with a Herman Miller I'd been eyeing for years, got a better webcam, even added a second monitor after all. I stopped waiting for someday and started rebuilding the life I thought I wasn't allowed to have. But success didn't erase the pain. It just gave me a ladder out of it. One morning, maybe 3 weeks into this new rhythm, I got a message from my cousin Grace, Noah's younger sister. She was 23, just out of college, and one of the few family members I'd always gotten along with. Her message just said, "I just found out everything. I'm so sorry." I stared at it, unsure what everything meant. I replied, "What do you mean?" She sent a voice message. "I had lunch with Brooke last weekend," she said. She was bragging about how she streamlined the vacation planning. I asked what happened with you and she kind of smirked and said, "Austin's too dramatic. He would have complained about everything anyway." There was a pause. Then Grace added, "She said you gave up your spot because you were too busy with work, that you practically begged to be left out." I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't believe it. I did, but because hearing it in someone else's voice made it real in a new way. Grace sent one more message. "I just wanted to say I think what they did was disgusting. And if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here for real." That meant more than she probably realized. She wasn't part of the core clique. She'd never been wrapped up in the family drama the way Brooke and Mom were, but she'd also never said anything before. The fact that she was now, even quietly, made me feel like maybe I wasn't crazy for being hurt. I thanked her, then went for a walk. As I wandered my neighborhood, I realized something important. I'd spent most of my life shrinking myself to keep the peace, skipping family events to avoid confrontation, keeping my mouth shut when someone made a passive-aggressive remark, playing the mature one, the chill one, the helper, the fixer, the guy who didn't make waves. But being quiet hadn't protected me. It had only made me easier to ignore. That walk ended up being 3 miles long. And by the time I got back home, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to send a long emotional message to my mom or Brooke. I wasn't going to beg for an apology or demand a refund. I wasn't even going to tell them I was hurt because they knew. Deep down they knew. They just didn't care. But that didn't mean I had to keep pretending. So, I took my first real step towards setting boundaries. I muted the family group chat, archived it. Then, I opened my contacts and created a new group, people who actually show up. So far, it had 4 names. My cousin Grace, my friend Nate, my dad, and my college roommate Jalen. People who saw me, who reached out, who didn't just take. It was small, but it was real. And it was mine. Over the next few weeks, I leaned into that group. Grace and I started texting more. Nate invited me to a weekend cabin trip with his friends. A guy's reset weekend, he called it. I almost said no, but something told me to go. And I'm glad I did, because sitting around a fire pit with people who actually wanted me there reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I was more than the role my family cast me in. I was smart. I was kind. I was building something, not just a career, but a life. One night, Jalen and I were on a Discord call catching up. He's one of those brutally honest types who doesn't sugarcoat anything. "Dude," he said mid-conversation, "you sound different." Different how? Like free. I sat with that for a moment. He was right. I did feel free, but freedom has a price. And I was starting to realize my next move would change everything. Because while I'd found strength in my own corner of the world, I still hadn't confronted the people who hurt me. I hadn't told them I knew about the lies, about the manipulation, about how far they were willing to go to keep me in the dark. And I wasn't planning to yell or scream when the time came. I had something better in mind, something quiet, something permanent. I didn't want revenge to feel petty. I didn't want to lash out or go on some rant or try to win a family argument that would just get twisted later, because that's what always happened. You raise your voice once and suddenly you're the ungrateful one, the dramatic one, the one who never lets things go. And the others, they get to play innocent. They shake their heads and say, I don't know why Austin's so angry all the time. But I wasn't angry all the time. I was angry now, and rightfully so. I'd paid $4,000 for a fantasy that didn't include me. I'd been lied to, deliberately used like a silent donor to a family because I wasn't even invited to. And the worst part, they'd done it like it was normal, like it was just another Tuesday. So no, I didn't want to scream. I wanted them to feel the slow burn of realizing they'd pushed the wrong person too far. And the timing, as fate would have it, couldn't have been better. It all started with a wedding. In mid-July, I got a paper invitation in the mail, a small cream-colored envelope with elegant cursive across the front. Mr. Austin Myers. I opened it with a sinking feeling in my gut. It was for Brooke. She was getting married. The wedding was set for late September at some vineyard 2 hours up the coast. Black tie, formal dinner, dance floor, family-only speeches, it said on the back of the RSVP card, which made me snort. I wondered which version of family they meant. But even more interesting than the invitation was the fact that Brooke hadn't told me directly. No call, no text, no hey, I'm engaged. No announcement in the group chat. Not that I'd seen one since I'd muted the whole thing. They wanted me there, but they didn't want me involved. And that right there was my opening. Because here's the thing about weddings in my family. They are productions. Not just emotionally, but financially. Everyone wants to be seen as generous, supportive, essential. There's pressure to give big, especially from older relatives. If you show up without contributing, you're quietly judged. If you're part of the inner circle, sibling of the bride, you're expected to help pay for things. And I knew Brooke. She was never going to say the words out loud. But I could already imagine the behind-the-scenes expectation. Austin will help. He has a good job. He owes the family after all. But I wasn't about to fund another party I wasn't actually welcome at. Not this time. Still, I didn't throw the invitation away. Kept it. Pinned it above my desk like a reminder because this wedding, this was going to be my stage. I started quietly gathering intel. Not in a creepy way, just observation. Grace was still in touch and she had no idea what I was planning. She mentioned in passing that the guest list was around 90 people, that Mom was helping with the flower arrangements, that the rehearsal dinner was going to be at a fancy downtown restaurant. Invite only. I wasn't invited. Shocking. But she also let something else slip. Something I hadn't expected. Brooke and her fiancé, Connor, were short on money. Apparently, the vineyard venue had jacked up prices last minute due to inflation or some event season surge. Their original quote had ballooned by $6,000, and they were scrambling to cover it. Brooke had told Grace it was under control, but that they'd probably need to lean on the family fund. The family fund. I almost laughed. That was Mom's term, a polite way of referring to the contributions that came from reliable sources in the family. And guess who was always the most reliable source? Yours truly. I was the guy who paid quickly, quietly, without fuss. Until now. The next week, I got a call from my mom. I knew it was coming. I've been waiting for it. Hey, sweetie, she said. Sugar thick. Got a minute? Sure, I said. I kept my tone polite, even. I wanted her to think everything was fine. She went into small talk at first. Asked how work was going. Said she missed hearing from me. I let her talk. Let her fill the silence. I didn't offer much. Just nods and etchums. Then finally, she said, So, I'm sure you got the invitation. I did. We're so excited, she said quickly, like she was afraid I might shut down the conversation. Brooke's been planning everything for months. You know how detail-oriented she is. Honestly, she's a natural. Of course she is. That's great, I said. There was a pause. Then the real ask came. I know things have been strained, but I wanted to see if you'd be willing to help out with some of the wedding costs. Just a little bit, nothing crazy. How much is a little bit? I asked calmly. Well, the venue costs went up, she admitted. And Brooke's really trying to keep things beautiful but reasonable. So, if you could contribute, even say $2,000, that would really take the pressure off. I almost smiled. The same script, different event. I'll think about it, I said. She sounded relieved. Thank you, honey. I knew you'd be mature about this. We hung up. I didn't send $1. Instead, I sent a different kind of message, one she wouldn't see coming. I made a donation, not to the wedding, but to myself. I used part of the money I'd earned from that recent startup project and booked a solo retreat in the mountains. A quiet Airbnb cabin with a view, a fireplace, and no cell reception. The same weekend as the rehearsal dinner. Then I went to a local print shop, made a professional copy of the Turks and Caicos Airbnb receipt, the one from March with my name as the payer. Underneath it, I printed a simple message in clean black font. I already paid for one family event this year. I wasn't invited to that one either. This time, I'm keeping my money. I sealed it in a cream envelope identical to the wedding invitation and addressed it to my mother's house. Hand-delivered it to her mailbox. No name, no signature, just the receipt and the truth. I didn't hear back. Not for 3 days. Then I got a message, not a call, from Brooke. What the hell is this? No greeting, no punctuation after, just anger. I didn't reply. She followed up, You're being so childish. I knew you were mad. But seriously, Mom is crying. Are you happy? Still, I said nothing because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to give them a script to twist. I was going to let them sit with what they did. Let them explain themselves for once. A week later, I got a call from Grace. She sounded weirdly excited. Okay, so I don't know what you did, she said. But the family group chat exploded. Apparently, Mom had shown Brooke the envelope, then brought it up in the group chat, asking if anyone else thought Austin's behavior was out of line. Brooke chimed in with her usual theatrics. But then, and this is where it gets interesting, other family members started chiming in too. Noah said he'd always thought it was strange I wasn't at the trip. Mark admitted he didn't realize I'd been cut out entirely. Even our Aunt Linda said, well, it does seem unfair considering he paid for it. The tide was turning, and they didn't know how to control it. That's when I knew I had them. Not with rage, not with drama, with facts, with silence, with boundaries. But I wasn't done yet, because the wedding was still coming and I had one final move to make. The day of the wedding arrived with the kind of quiet satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. While my mother and sister were likely scrambling between florists and makeup artists at some overpriced vineyard, I was tucked away in a peaceful cabin up north, sipping black coffee on a wooden deck that overlooked a stretch of pine trees glowing gold in the morning sun. No drama, no fake smiles, just the crackle of the wind through the branches and the occasional bird call. It was the first time in a long while that I felt completely free. But don't let the peace fool you. My revenge was already in motion. See, my plan had never been about ruining the wedding. I wasn't that petty. I wasn't going to show up and make a scene or interrupt the vows or post a Facebook rant like a bitter ex. That would have just fed their narrative. Austin's dramatic. Austin's unstable. Austin's jealous. No, my revenge was about control. It was about shifting the story, taking back the narrative they'd stolen, and making them confront the reality they'd worked so hard to bury. And to do that, I needed to be precise. 2 weeks before the wedding, I created an email, a simple Gmail address under the name Family Finance 2025. I sent one email to about 30 relatives, mostly extended family who weren't in the Brooke inner circle but who were still on the guest list, aunts, uncles, cousins. I made sure not to include my mom, Brooke, or any of her bridesmaids. That wasn't the point. The point was everyone else. The email was short. No bitterness, just facts. Hi all. Some of you may not be aware, but earlier this year, I paid a $4,000 deposit for a family vacation to Turks and Caicos, A trip I was ultimately not invited to. I was told my absence was voluntary. It wasn't. I've since learned that this pattern of exclusion has been ongoing, and I believe it's time people knew the truth. I won't be attending Brooke's wedding. I wish her and Connor the best. Just thought you all deserve to know why I'll be absent. Austin. That was it. No accusations, no name-calling, just clarity. Something that, for once, they couldn't twist. The fallout began slowly. I started getting quiet texts from second cousins. I had no idea. That's awful. I'm so sorry. A few even said they wouldn't be attending the wedding after all. If family doesn't mean all family, what's the point? One wrote. Another simply said, you deserved better. But the real hit came later when the whispers started spreading at the rehearsal dinner. According to Grace, who is now feeding me updates like some kind of undercover agent, the conversation around the wine tables wasn't about Brooke's dress or the flower arrangements. It was about me. Apparently, a few people had printed out the email. Others had it on their phones, and the consensus wasn't flattering. How do you forget to invite your own brother? Wait, he paid for the trip and didn't go? Brooke always was a bit calculated. One uncle even told Brooke to her face that excluding me was a stain on an otherwise happy occasion. Brooke, being Brooke, tried to spin it. Said I had volunteered to stay behind, that I had work conflicts, that I was just overly sensitive. But her voice was shaking because the story was out of her control now, and she couldn't charm her way out of it. The morning of the wedding, I heard from Grace again. She's freaking out, she said over voice message. Connor's annoyed. Your mom's crying in the bridal suite, and Aunt Linda literally told Brooke she was embarrassed for her. It's a whole thing. I didn't gloat. Not out loud, but inside it felt like justice. Still, I knew Brooke wouldn't go down without one last move. I was right. 2 days after the wedding, I got a message from her. Congratulations. You turned my wedding into a pity parade. Hope you're proud of yourself. I didn't respond. Then Mom texted, I don't know what you hope to accomplish with that email. Family doesn't embarrass family like that. That one made me laugh. Family doesn't embarrass family. Like excluding your son from a vacation he paid for isn't embarrassing? I let the silence speak for me, but I wasn't quite finished yet. A week later, I sent one last package. It was addressed to my mom's house, but it was for Brooke. Inside the box was the original Airbnb receipt from the Turks and Caicos trip, a copy of the email I'd sent the family, and a check for $4,000. The memo line read, reimbursement, services not rendered. I wanted nothing from them. No refund, no apology, no fake reconciliation. Just a clean cut, a line in the sand. And I think that's what really broke them. Because people like Brooke and my mother, they thrive on control, on keeping people close enough to use, but never close enough to care. And when someone walks away calmly without a fight, they can't spin that. They can't win that. You don't have to burn bridges when you know they're going nowhere worth visiting. That fall, I had my best quarter yet. The startup client renewed their contract and referred me to 2 more. I upgraded my apartment, bought a new espresso machine, took my own vacation to Japan, solo this time, and it was everything that Turks and Caicos would never have been. Peaceful, honest, mine. Grace and I stayed in touch. She eventually left the family group chat, too. Said she was done pretending Brooke was some saint. We're not best friends or anything, but she checks in now and then, sends me memes, asks about UX stuff. She even sent a photo of the wedding cake 2 months later with the caption, still doesn't taste like forgiveness. And that's really how this ends. No huge blow-up, no screaming match, just a clean severance, a reclamation of peace. I didn't need them to say sorry. I just needed them to know I didn't need them anymore. And now they do. Let them toast to family all they want. Now on to the next story. Story 5. I was standing in the corner of the party room with a paper plate in my hand when it happened. The moment that still burns in my mind like a bad movie I can't shut off. My name is Jason. I'm 32, and all I wanted was for my son's 6th birthday to be a happy memory for him. Balloons, party hats, a dinosaur cake he'd been talking about for weeks, the whole deal. But as I walked toward the dessert table to get him a slice, I noticed the cake was missing. At first, I thought one of the staff had moved it to the back to cut it. Then I saw it in the trash, face down, smashed. And my sister Rachel was standing right there, leaning against the counter like she owned the place, scrolling through her phone with that smug half-smile she reserves for moments she knows will hurt. I asked her what happened, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was pounding. She didn't even look up, just shrugged and said, "He didn't deserve it anyway." Like it was a joke. Like my son's birthday cake being thrown away was some kind of moral lesson. I felt my stomach twist, a mix of anger and disbelief. My son was in the corner playing with his little friends, completely unaware that his special moment had just been trashed. Literally. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was stare at Rachel, trying to process what I just heard. I asked her again, slower this time, if she had something to do with it. She finally looked up, rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, Jason. It's just cake." It wasn't just cake. It was the look on my kid's face when he'd been telling everyone about his birthday for the last month. It was the fact that I had spent hours the night before setting up decorations because no one else in the family offered to help. It was the way Rachel had been taking little shots at me all day. Comments about how some people go overboard or, "It's not that deep. He's just a kid." And now this. I could feel every muscle in my body tense up. I didn't want to start a scene with kids running around. So, I went over to my son, told him we were leaving, and packed up what little was left of the party favors. I texted the parents of the other kids, made some excuse about him not feeling well, and got us out of there before Rachel could say anything else. The drive home was quiet. My son was clutching the dinosaur figurine that came with the cake topper, asking why everyone had to go home early. I told him we'd have our own little party later, just the two of us, and we'd get a new cake. He smiled, which somehow made me feel both relieved and even angrier at the same time. Relieved because he was okay, but angry because he shouldn't have had to be. That night, I sat in my living room long after he went to bed, staring at the phone, waiting for someone, anyone, in my family to call and ask what happened. No one did. But the next morning, my phone rang. It was Mom. She didn't ask about my son, didn't apologize, didn't even acknowledge what had happened. Her voice was shaky, but not with guilt, with panic. "Jason," she said, "I need you to talk to the venue before they cancel Rachel's wedding." I just sat there stunned, the phone pressed to my ear. She was calling me about Rachel's wedding less than 24 hours after my son's birthday had been ruined. I asked her if she was seriously not going to say anything about what happened yesterday. She went quiet for a moment and then said, "Look, I know Rachel can be harsh sometimes, but this is her big day coming up, and we can't have any drama with the venue." Something inside me snapped at that moment. It wasn't just yesterday. It was every holiday where Rachel's preferences came first. Every family photo where she got to be in the center because she's the firstborn. Every time I'd been told to just let things go for the sake of peace. My jaw tightened as Mom kept talking about deposits and deadlines, and how the venue manager was threatening to cancel, because Rachel hadn't paid the balance yet. She wanted me to call, smooth things over, maybe even cover the cost until Rachel sorted things out. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just told her I had to think about it and hung up. Then I sat there for a long time staring at my son's little toy dinosaurs scattered across the floor, feeling this strange calm settle over me. For years, I'd been the one to keep things running smoothly, to fix things when Rachel messed up, to be the reasonable one. But now I wasn't sure I wanted to fix anything. And that's when the doorbell rang. I opened the door expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe a package. Instead, it was my dad standing there with his arms crossed, looking irritated like I'd personally inconvenienced him just by existing. He didn't even say hello, just brushed past me into the living room like he owned the place. "We need to talk about Rachel's wedding," he said, glancing at the toys on the floor like they were some sort of offense. I just stood there for a moment, still processing the fact that the man who hadn't once checked on his grandson after yesterday's disaster was now in my living room to talk about money for his favorite child's big day. I asked him straight out if he knew what happened at my son's party. He shrugged, literally shrugged, like he was talking about a weather report. "Kids are resilient," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "What matters now is making sure your sister's wedding doesn't turn into a circus." That word circus hit me harder than I expected, because to him, That's what my kid's ruined birthday was. Just noise, just an inconvenience. He sat down on my couch like he was preparing for a lecture and started explaining how the venue had called him too. How they were concerned about payment and threatening to cancel if they didn't get the balance. He leaned forward, looked me right in the eye and said, "You're good with people, Jason. You always smooth things over. Can't you just take care of this? You make more money than Rachel. It's nothing to you." There it was. The unspoken family rule said out loud. Jason fixes things. Jason sacrifices. Jason makes it right because he can. I asked him why Rachel wasn't taking care of her own wedding bill, and he sighed like I was being dense. "She's under a lot of stress," he said. "Planning a wedding is expensive. She's had to cut back her hours at work." I reminded him that Rachel had chosen to cut her hours at work to focus on herself and had spent the last 3 weekends going on spa days with her friends, something she bragged about in the family group chat. He ignored that, changed the subject, and started talking about how this wedding is important for the family's reputation and how people will talk if it gets canceled. That's when my son walked into the room, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up on one side. He saw my dad and smiled shyly, holding up his toy dinosaur. "Grandpa, look," he said, clearly trying to show off his favorite toy. Dad barely glanced at him before going back to his speech about Rachel. My son's smile faltered and he went back to his room quietly. I watched him go and something in me hardened. I told my dad I wasn't sure I wanted to help with Rachel's wedding. Not after what happened yesterday. His expression changed instantly. Gone was the calm, reasonable father. He frowned and said, "Don't be petty, Jason. This is bigger than a cake. You know how Rachel is. She didn't mean it." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked him if he would have said the same thing if someone had ruined Rachel's wedding cake. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and said, "I really hope you're not planning to hold the family hostage over this." Then he left, slamming the door behind him. That night, Mom called again. This time, she tried a softer approach. She told me she understood why I was upset, but I needed to think about the bigger picture. "You know how your sister is," she said, echoing Dad. "She's always been difficult. But this wedding is her dream, Jason. If the venue cancels, she'll never forgive you." I told her it wasn't my responsibility to fix Rachel's mistakes. There was a pause on the line, and then Mom said something that made my blood run cold. "If you don't step in, your father and I will have to use the savings we were keeping for your son's future. Is that what you want? For him to miss out on college because you couldn't let go of some cake?" I didn't even know they had savings set aside for my son. I asked her why they hadn't told me about it before, and she brushed it off, saying it was meant to be a surprise later, but now apparently it was leverage. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. The next few days were a blur of passive-aggressive group chat messages and relatives calling me to be the bigger person. My aunt texted me a paragraph about family unity. My cousin called to say Rachel was crying and felt attacked. Rachel herself didn't bother contacting me directly, but she posted on social media about toxic people trying to ruin the happiest day of my life. It didn't take a genius to figure out who she meant. Meanwhile, my son kept asking when we could have his real birthday cake. I promised him we'd do something special, just the two of us. That weekend, we went to a little bakery downtown, picked out the biggest chocolate cake they had, and celebrated in our kitchen with party hats and streamers I put up myself. It was simple, but it made him so happy. Watching him laugh with frosting on his face made me realize how long I'd been letting my family's drama dictate my happiness. A few days later, Mom showed up at my house unannounced. She came in looking like she'd been crying, sat down at the table, and launched straight into her plea. "The venue says if we don't pay by Friday, they'll cancel. Your father is furious. Rachel is devastated. Please, Jason, you're the only one who can stop this." I asked her what Rachel had said about my son's birthday. She hesitated, then said she feels bad. I told her that wasn't good enough. If Rachel wanted my help, she could come over, look me in the eye, and apologize, not just to me, but to my son. Mom didn't like that. She said I was putting conditions on family love. I stayed firm. I told her that love goes both ways. And right now, all I saw was everyone expecting me to sacrifice while Rachel got whatever she wanted. Mom left looking disappointed. And not even an hour later, I got a text from Rachel. Stop trying to control everything. It's not my fault your kid can't handle a little disappointment. Pay the venue or don't, but stop making this about you. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I screenshotted it and sent it to Mom and Dad with one sentence. This is what your devastated daughter thinks. Mom didn't reply. Dad sent a single text. We'll talk later. I knew what that meant. Another confrontation was coming, and I was done backing down. 2 days after Rachel's text, I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my front door. No name, no return address, just my first name scribbled across it in Mom's handwriting. I pulled it off, walked inside, and opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside was a folded letter and a bank statement. The letter was short, almost cold. It said that since I had refused to support the family in their time of need, Mom and Dad had decided to withdraw the savings they'd been keeping for my son and use them to cover Rachel's wedding balance. The bank statement showed the withdrawal. Tens of thousands of dollars. Money I didn't even know existed until last week. Gone. At the bottom of the letter, Mom had written, "We hope you will still come to the wedding and put this ugliness behind us." I stood there staring at the paper, my hands shaking. My son was in the living room watching cartoons, completely oblivious to the fact that the money meant for his future had just been taken to fund a party he wasn't even excited about going to. My chest felt tight. It wasn't just about the money. It was the audacity. The decision had been made without even asking me, without even a conversation. I called Dad immediately. He picked up on the second ring, sounding annoyed. "I figured you'd call," he said, like this was all just an inevitable step in some plan. I asked him if he really thought it was okay to take money meant for his grandson and spend it on Rachel's wedding. He didn't hesitate. "It's not just Rachel's wedding, Jason. It's a family event. Your son will benefit, too, being part of a happy occasion." I almost laughed because it was so absurd. It didn't sound real. I told him my son didn't even understand what was going on, that he'd barely seen Rachel in the last year because she never made time for him. Dad's voice turned sharp. "This attitude is exactly why we didn't tell you about the savings sooner. You'd hoard it and make everything about your son when this is supposed to be about all of us." Hoard it. That word burned. This wasn't hoarding. This was planning for the future for the kid they were supposed to love just as much as Rachel. But to them, his future was negotiable, a bargaining chip to keep the peace. When I got off the phone, I didn't even realize how hard I'd been gripping the counter until I saw the faint white marks on my hands. My phone buzzed again a few minutes later. This time it was Rachel. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a photo of her in a wedding dress at a fitting with the caption, "Thanks for finally stepping up. Knew you'd do the right thing eventually." I didn't respond. Couldn't. Instead, I went into my son's room, sat on the edge of his bed, and just watched him play with his Lego set. He looked up at me, smiling, and said, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to make cakes so no one ever throws them away." I felt something in my chest twist so hard I had to look away. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that letter, that smug text from Rachel, and my son's little face when he said that. It felt like I was back in high school again, being told to give Rachel the front seat, to give Rachel the last slice of pizza, to skip my plans because Rachel needed a ride. Except this time, it wasn't a slice of pizza. It was my kid's future. A few days later, the betrayal deepened in a way I didn't think was possible. I got a call from the school. My son's kindergarten teacher sounded concerned. She said my parents had come by the school earlier that day, saying they were there to pick up their grandson early. Apparently, they told the staff that I had approved it, which I hadn't. Luckily, the school called me first to confirm, but the fact that they had tried to take my kid without telling me left me cold. I called Mom immediately. She sounded cheerful, like nothing was wrong. "We just wanted to take him shopping for a little suit for the wedding," she said. "You weren't answering your phone, so we figured we'd surprise you." I told her flat out she was never to take my son from school without my permission again. There was a long pause before she said, Jason, you're overreacting. We raised you. We know how to take care of a child. This attitude is why Rachel says, you're becoming impossible to deal with. It was like a switch flipped in my head. Impossible to deal with. That's what they called me when I stopped doing their taxes for free. When I told them I couldn't babysit Rachel's dog every weekend. When I dared to say no to anything that inconvenienced me. The next day I got another letter. This one wasn't taped to my door. It was slid under it. Inside was an invitation, a wedding invitation. My name wasn't on it. Neither was my son's. The envelope had been addressed to me, but inside it said, Mr. Jason plus guest. No mention of family, no mention of my son as ring bearer or anything else. It was a message and I got it loud and clear. When I called Mom to ask if it was a mistake, she said Rachel wanted a small ceremony. Kids make things complicated. I asked her if she was seriously telling me that after taking my kids' savings to fund this wedding, he wasn't even welcome to attend. She said, you're welcome to bring a guest. Maybe someone special. It's time you moved on and focused on your own life instead of being so wrapped up in your child. I hung up before I said something that would scorch the earth. I just sat in my quiet house for a long time, staring at that invitation on the table. It felt like my whole life had been leading to this one boiling point. Every slight, every little favor I'd done, every time I'd bitten my tongue for the sake of peace. This was the line. That night, as my son slept, I opened my laptop and started going through my files, emails, receipts, copies of text messages. For years, I'd kept records because I was the one who handled family logistics, vacations, payments, even Rachel's rent once when she'd been between jobs. It was all there. Every time I'd bailed her out. Every time I'd quietly paid for something so she wouldn't face consequences. I sat there until 2 o'clock in the morning, piecing it all together like a puzzle, my anger cooling into something sharper, something more deliberate. By the time the sun came up, I knew one thing for sure. They might have taken my son's savings, but they weren't going to take my dignity. Not this time. And that's when Rachel herself showed up at my door. Rachel didn't knock. She just stood there on my porch like she'd been waiting for me to open the door. Her arms were crossed and she was wearing that same smug half-smile I'd seen at my son's party. I thought about not letting her in, but before I could decide, she said, "Can we talk?" Her tone was casual, like we were discussing what to have for lunch instead of the fact that she just gutted my trust and used my kids' future savings as her wedding fund. I stepped aside without saying a word and she walked in, glancing around my house like she was checking for dust. She sat down at the kitchen table without being asked, leaned back in the chair, and started scrolling her phone like she wasn't in the middle of detonating what was left of our relationship. "So," she said, "finally I hear you're mad." Mad? That word sounded so small compared to what I was feeling. I sat across from her and asked if she had any idea what she'd done to me and my son. She looked at me like I was being dramatic and said, "Jason, you're acting like they stole from you. Mom and Dad were just reallocating family resources. And honestly, you should be glad it's going to something meaningful. You can always make more money for your kids' college, but my wedding only happens once." I stared at her, wondering if she really believed what she was saying, or if she just enjoyed twisting the knife. She kept talking, explaining how stressful wedding planning had been, how expensive everything was, how she had to cut work hours because she needed to be present for fittings and tastings. The more she talked, the more I realized she didn't see me as her brother. She saw me as a resource, a tool to be used to smooth out the bumps in her life. When I didn't say anything, she put her phone down and said, "Look, I get that you're hurt, but this isn't just about you. The family needs you to step up. You've always been the responsible one. It's who you are. And let's be honest, Jason, it's not like you had big plans for that money anyway." That last sentence hit me like a punch. I stood up and told her to leave. She acted surprised, like I was overreacting. But when she saw I wasn't joking, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "Fine. Just don't ruin the wedding with your mood." Then she walked out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. After she left, I sat at the table for what felt like hours, staring at the empty chair she'd just been sitting in. It was quiet, too quiet, and that's when it really hit me. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was empty, tired, done. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the couch while my son slept in his room, staring at nothing. The next day at work, my boss asked if I was okay because I guess I looked as bad as I felt. I lied and said I was fine. Then came the family group chat. It started with Mom posting a picture of Rachel's engagement photos followed by a caption. "So proud of our girl. Counting down the days." Everyone chimed in with hearts and emojis. No one mentioned me. No one asked if I was coming to the wedding. No one even said my name. It was like I'd been erased from the family overnight. I quietly left the chat. No announcement, no message, just gone. A few hours later, I got a private text from Mom. "Why would you do that? You're making this harder than it has to be." I didn't reply. Over the next week, the silence from my side must have made them nervous because the phone calls started ramping up. First Mom, then Dad, then my aunt, then even my grandmother. Each one delivering their own version of the same lecture. Family is everything. Rachel is sensitive. I need to be the bigger person, and so on. Every time I let the calls go to voicemail, I felt a little bit lighter and a little bit lonelier. The real low point came the following weekend. I had promised my son we'd go to the park, but when we got there, I saw Rachel and Mom sitting on a bench sipping coffee. They looked up when they saw us and Rachel smirked. "Oh, look who finally came out of his cave," she said, loudly enough for me to hear. Mom didn't say anything, just gave me this look. A look that said I was being ridiculous, that I was the one causing all this tension. My son wanted to play, so I let him go to the swings while I stood off to the side. I could hear Rachel talking to Mom about wedding colors, laughing like none of this mattered. Then Rachel called out, "Hey Jason, you should smile more. You're going to look miserable in all the wedding photos." I didn't answer. I just took my son's hand, told him we were going to get ice cream instead, and left. That night I broke down. I sat on the floor of my kitchen after my son went to bed and just let it all out. Years of being second to Rachel, years of swallowing insults, years of being the family fixer. I cried until I didn't have anything left. And then I just sat there in the dark staring at the fridge. But somewhere in that quiet, something started to shift. The anger that had been boiling finally cooled, and what was left was clarity. They had taken everything they could from me. Money, time, emotional energy, and they still wanted more. They wanted me to show up to that wedding, smile, pretend everything was fine, and let Rachel walk all over me again. I wasn't going to give them that. The next morning, I started taking small steps. I called the bank to open a new account just for me and my son, separate from anything my parents could access. I spoke to my HR department about setting up an education fund through work, so no one could touch his future again. I went through every shared bill and subscription I had with my parents, phone plans, streaming accounts, even the joint Costco membership, and one by one I removed myself. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. Mom noticed, of course. She called me that evening, furious. "Are you trying to punish us?" she demanded. I stayed calm and told her I was just taking care of my own responsibilities. She accused me of abandoning the family. I didn't argue. I just said, "Maybe that's what needs to happen." After that, the calls stopped. The silence this time felt different, heavier, but also freeing. One night, I sat down with my son and told him we might not be going to Aunt Rachel's wedding. He thought about it for a moment and said, "That's okay. Can we have cake that day instead?" I smiled for the first time in what felt like weeks and said, "Yeah, buddy, we can have as much cake as you want." And that's when I got the email, an official one from the venue itself. It wasn't addressed to me, but I was CC'd probably by accident. It was a notice of possible cancellation due to a payment dispute and unprofessional communication from the client. I read it twice, my heart thumping in my chest. Rachel's perfect wedding was about to fall apart. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt a flicker of control again. Not revenge, not yet, just control. I closed the laptop slowly, already feeling the beginning of a plan taking shape in the back of my mind. Because if my family thought they'd seen me at my worst, they hadn't seen anything yet. Something changed in me after that email. For weeks, I had been moving through life like a ghost, weighed down by every insult, every passive-aggressive comment, Every time they had made me feel like the problem. But now, I had proof that the perfect image they were clinging to, the dream wedding, the family unity they kept throwing in my face, was already crumbling on its own. And for once, I didn't feel powerless. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, made pancakes with my son, and actually enjoyed breakfast. Not rushed, not distracted, but present. I think he could tell something was different because he kept grinning at me and saying, "You're not sad today." I wasn't. When I got to work, I threw myself into my projects in a way I hadn't in months. My boss noticed and asked if something good had happened. I just smiled and said I was making space for better things. By the end of the week, I closed a big deal that earned me a bonus. It wasn't life-changing money, but it felt symbolic, like life was giving me back some of what had been taken. I used part of that bonus to book a small weekend trip for me and my son. Nothing fancy, just a cozy cabin by the lake a few hours away. We spent the weekend fishing, building campfires, and eating marshmallows until we were both sticky and laughing. For the first time in months, I didn't think about Rachel, the wedding, or the family drama. It was just me and my boy, and it felt right. When I got back, my phone was full of missed calls and messages. Mom had sent a long text about how the family was hurting without me, and how I was breaking Rachel's heart. I read it once, then put the phone down. I didn't reply. Instead, I kept building my life outside of them. I signed my son up for a weekend soccer program and went to every practice, cheering from the sidelines. I started cooking again, experimenting with recipes we could make together. At night, after he went to bed, I worked on a side project I'd been putting off for years, an app I'd always wanted to launch, but never had the time or energy to finish because I was too busy fixing everyone else's problems. As the weeks passed, I felt stronger, calmer, sharper. The constant knot in my stomach started to unwind. Then one day, I got an unexpected email from the venue again. This time, I wasn't just CC'd. It was sent directly to me. The manager said she knew I was related to the couple and asked if I could help mediate because Rachel had been unresponsive and rude during their last interaction. She said the deadline for payment was approaching and hinted that the venue was seriously considering canceling the reservation if things didn't improve. I stared at that email for a long time. This was it. The moment my family had been waiting for me to swoop in and save them. Only this time, I didn't feel the usual pressure to fix everything. Instead, I wrote back politely, thanked her for the update, and said I was not involved in any financial or planning decisions for Rachel's wedding. Then, I closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of water, and went outside to play catch with my son. That night, I got a string of frantic texts from Rachel. "Why would you tell them you're not involved? They think we can't pay now. Do you want my wedding to get canceled?" I didn't reply. The next day, she sent another message. "Fine. If you want to be a jerk about it, just know you're dead to me after this." I sat there reading it, and instead of feeling crushed, I felt free, like a weight had been lifted. That freedom made me bold. I decided to take a social media break, not to avoid them, but to reclaim it. I cleared out my friend lists, archived old family photos, and posted a single update. A picture of me and my son at the lake, smiling with the caption, "Best weekend ever." No tags, no context, just us. Within an hour, my aunt texted, "Looks like someone's finally moving on." Good. As my personal life improved, so did my work. My boss called me into his office one afternoon and said he was impressed with my recent performance and wanted to recommend me for a senior position that had just opened up. It would mean more responsibility but also a big salary bump and more control over my schedule, which meant more time with my son. I accepted. When I told my son about the promotion, he cheered and said, "Does that mean we can get more cake?" I laughed harder than I had in weeks. But not everything was quiet. Mom showed up at my house again a few days later, looking exhausted. She said Rachel had been calling her nonstop, crying, saying the venue was about to cancel because the final payment still hadn't been made. Mom begged me to just cover the balance for the sake of peace. I told her calmly that I wasn't involved and wouldn't be helping. She said, "If this wedding falls apart, Rachel will never forgive you." I said, "Then I guess she won't forgive me." For once, I didn't feel guilty when she left looking disappointed. That night, I sat down at my laptop and finished the last piece of my app. After months of work, I finally hit publish. It went live the next morning, and by the end of the week, it had gained traction. More downloads than I expected, some positive reviews, even a feature on a small tech blog. My confidence grew with every notification. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was building something for me and my son, something no one could take away. And then came the real turning point. A few days later, the venue manager called me directly. She said Rachel had finally called back, but had yelled at the staff and threatened to take her business elsewhere if they didn't give her more time. The manager said she wanted to know if there was another point of contact for the family because she wasn't sure she could keep dealing with Rachel. I thanked her for letting me know and said I wasn't involved. But this time, I didn't hang up right away. I asked a few polite questions about how the payment process worked, what the deadlines were, what would happen if the balance wasn't paid. The manager explained everything patiently, probably thinking I was trying to help. I took careful notes. By the time I hung up, I knew exactly how much time Rachel had left before the booking was canceled. That night, I sat in my office after my son went to bed, staring at those notes. For weeks, I had been quietly rebuilding my life step by step. Now, I was in a position to do something more. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but to finally make it clear that I wasn't their safety net anymore. And as I closed my notebook and turned off the light, I realized something. I wasn't just ready to move on. I was ready to take control of the ending. And Rachel had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was like the fog that had hung over me since my son's ruined birthday had finally burned away, leaving nothing but sharp focus. I knew what I needed to do, not just to protect myself and my son, but to finally draw a line that couldn't be crossed. My first step was subtle. I called the venue manager back, not to interfere, but to ask a few more detailed questions under the guise of being a concerned family member. I asked about the specific payment deadlines, the cancellation policy, and whether they required anything in writing to release the booking if payment wasn't made. She told me that because of Rachel's behavior, they were already considering terminating the contract. She sounded almost relieved that someone in the family was being polite and professional for once. I thanked her and asked if she would be willing to copy me on all future correspondence regarding the booking just so there was no miscommunication. She agreed, probably assuming I'd be the mediator. And just like that, I had a direct line to every development, every deadline, every official warning. With that information in hand, I started to prepare. I didn't tell anyone what I knew. Not my parents, not my aunt, not even my closest friend. I kept my replies to family messages short and polite, never giving them anything they could twist into a fight. The calmer I was, the more desperate they seemed to become. Rachel sent another text a few days later saying, "You can still fix this before it's too late." I didn't reply. Instead, I began documenting everything. Every message, every email, every call log. I even saved the voicemail Mom left where she admitted they had taken my son's college fund for the greater good. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about building a record, proof that I wasn't the villain they were painting me to be. In the meantime, my work promotion came through officially. My new salary hit my account for the first time, and it felt like validation for every long night. Every time I'd put in extra effort while Rachel coasted through life, I opened a dedicated education trust for my son, with my finances more secure than ever. This time, no one but me had access. The more I strengthened my own position, the more the power dynamic began to shift. At the same time, I started to notice cracks forming in Rachel's carefully curated image. One afternoon, I ran into a mutual acquaintance, a florist I'd worked with on a charity event, who mentioned that Rachel had stopped by her shop looking for last-minute arrangements, but had been rude and demanding. The florist said Rachel had complained loudly that she couldn't find anyone competent to work with her. Apparently, word was starting to get around in the local event planning community that Rachel was difficult to deal with. That was interesting. I didn't spread rumors. I didn't have to. Rachel was digging her own hole, and all I had to do was step back and let it get deeper. A few days later, the venue manager sent a formal notice. If payment was not received by the end of the month, the booking would be canceled and the deposit forfeited. I knew Rachel hadn't made the payment because she'd been too busy complaining about how unfair it was that she had to pay anything at all. This time, I didn't just sit on the information. I printed the notice out and put it in a folder with all my other documentation. I wasn't ready to use it yet, but I wanted to be ready when the time came. Then something unexpected happened. Mom called and asked if she could come over alone without Dad. When she arrived, she looked tired, older somehow. She sat down at my table and said, "I don't know what to do with your sister anymore. She's out of control." It was the first time I had heard her say anything even remotely critical of Rachel. She admitted that Rachel had maxed out 2 credit cards paying for things she didn't actually need for the wedding and had started asking Mom and Dad for more money. Money they didn't have. Mom looked at me with watery eyes and said, "I think we made a mistake taking your son's savings. We just wanted to make things easier for her. But it's never enough." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the letter, the threats, the way she had tried to guilt me into paying for Rachel's mess. So, I told her calmly that she had a chance to make things right. She could start by talking to Rachel and making her apologize, not just to me but to my son, and she could replace the money they had taken even if it took time. Mom nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't ready to take that step yet. She said she'd think about it and left. That night, I received another email from the venue manager. This time, Rachel had missed a scheduled call entirely. The manager was clearly fed up and said this was her final courtesy notice before cancellation. It was like watching a storm roll in from a distance, knowing exactly when and where it was going to hit. I decided it was time to make my own move. Quietly, carefully, I wrote a short, professional email to the venue thanking them for keeping me informed and letting them know that if the booking was canceled, I would be happy to discuss alternative arrangements for a future event. I didn't specify what event, just left the door open. It wasn't a promise. It was a seed. And while that seed was planted, I focused on my own life more than ever. My app started gaining serious traction, enough that a small investor reached out to me about potential funding. I found myself on calls with people who were excited about what I'd built, who respected me for what I could bring to the table. Meanwhile, my son was thriving. His teacher told me he'd become more confident, more engaged in class. At home, he laughed more, asked more questions, seemed lighter somehow. It was like we were both breathing easier now that we weren't constantly under the shadow of my family's drama. And then, just when things were starting to settle into this new rhythm, Rachel showed up again, this time furious. She pounded on my door until I opened it and stormed past me into the house. "The venue says they're going to cancel if I don't pay by Friday," she said, throwing her hands up. "You need to fix this. Call them. Tell them you'll cover it. Do whatever you have to do." I didn't answer right away. I just watched her pace around my kitchen, ranting about how unfair it was that weddings were so expensive, how ridiculous it was that she was expected to pay on time. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I said very calmly, "I'm not going to fix this for you. Not this time." Her mouth fell open. "You're serious?" "Yes." She glared at me for a long time, then said something that confirmed what I already knew. "If this wedding gets canceled, it's on you." She stormed out before I could reply, leaving the door open behind her. I closed it slowly, locked it, and stood there in the quiet. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment when they all made it clear that they weren't going to stop pushing until I pushed back. And for the first time in my life, I was ready, really ready, to push back in a way they would never forget. Because now I had the information, the leverage, and the calm, deliberate patience to use it. And when the deadline came, I wouldn't just be a spectator. I would be the one holding the final card. Friday morning came with a strange kind of stillness. I woke up before my alarm, made coffee, and stood by the kitchen window as the sun came up. I could feel it. This quiet, steady anticipation humming under my skin. Today was the deadline, the day everything came due, literally and figuratively. I sat down at my desk and opened my email. Right on schedule, there it was. The final notice from the venue stating that if payment was not received by 5 p.m., the booking would be canceled and the deposit forfeited. They had CC'd me as I had requested, which meant I had it in writing. I didn't reply right away. I let the clock tick for a few hours while I focused on work, taking calls and answering messages, all the while feeling this calm, methodical energy building inside me. Around noon, my phone started lighting up with texts from Mom. Jason, please just talk to your sister. The venue says this is the last chance. Don't let her big day be ruined. Then from Dad, step up, be a man, handle this. And finally, Rachel herself, you have until 5. If you don't pay, don't bother coming to the wedding or talking to me ever again. I almost laughed at that one. The threat wasn't really a threat. It was a promise. At 4:45 p.m., I opened my laptop and drafted one simple, professional email to the venue manager. Thank you for keeping me informed. I understand today is the final deadline for payment on the booking under Rachel. If payment is not received and the contract is terminated, please let me know as soon as possible. I would like to discuss reserving the venue for a future private event on a different date. I sent it, closed my laptop, and went outside to play soccer with my son until the sun dipped below the horizon. When we came back inside, there was a new email waiting for me. Dear Jason, as of 5 p.m. today, no payment has been received from Rachel. The booking has been canceled in accordance with the contract terms, and the deposit has been forfeited. Please let us know if you would like to discuss a reservation for a future date. Best regards, venue manager. I felt this wave of quiet satisfaction wash over me. Not gloating, not petty, just final. That night, I posted a picture on social media of me and my son eating ice cream on the couch with a caption that simply said, "Good day." Within an hour, my phone buzzed with a call from Mom. I let it go to voicemail, then another from Dad, ignored. Then a barrage of texts from Rachel, each one angrier than the last. Are you happy now? You ruined my wedding. You're disgusting. You'll regret this. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called the venue the next morning. I spoke to the manager directly and arranged to reserve the same date, but not for a wedding, for a private celebration dinner. I didn't give details, just locked it in and paid the deposit myself. Then I sent one single message to the family group chat. Since the venue was already booked for that day, I figured I'd use it. You're welcome to come if you can be civil. The chat went silent for almost an hour. Then my aunt replied with a single shocked emoji. Mom finally called. This time I answered. She started crying immediately, saying Rachel was inconsolable, that this would destroy her reputation. I stayed calm and told her that this was never about destroying anything. It was about finally showing them that I wasn't their safety net anymore. I reminded her of what she had said about taking my son's college fund for the greater good, and asked if she still thought that was fair now that it had come to this. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, Jason, you can't really go through with hosting your own event that day. It'll humiliate her. I told her that Rachel's humiliation wasn't my responsibility, just like her wedding wasn't mine to save. And then I hung up. Over the next few days, I finalized my plans. Nothing flashy, just a simple dinner for me, my son, and a few close friends who had been my real support system through this mess. People who actually showed up for us. I arranged for a custom cake to be made, a dinosaur cake, just like the one that had been thrown away at my son's party. When the day finally came, it felt almost surreal. I got texts from a few relatives saying they wouldn't be attending because it wouldn't be appropriate after what happened to Rachel. Fine, the people who mattered were there. We arrived at the venue early, and as soon as my son saw the cake, his eyes lit up. You got it back, he shouted. Better than before, I said, handing him the first slice. We spent the evening laughing, eating, and enjoying ourselves in a way I didn't think was possible just a few months ago. And as I watched my son blow out the candles on the cake, months late but no less special, I realized that this was what I had been fighting for all along. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but peace. Halfway through the dinner, I got a notification on my phone. Rachel had posted on social media about the most painful day of her life, saying how she had been betrayed by her own brother. The comments were full of sympathy, but also questions about why she hadn't paid her own venue bill. I didn't reply. I didn't explain because, for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to. The people who mattered were right there in the room with me, smiling and eating cake. And Rachel's perfect day that had been built on taking from us, it was gone. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't done either, because there was still one last thing I needed to do before I could finally close this chapter for good. The days after my little celebration were oddly quiet, like the air right after a storm. My phone barely buzzed, except for the occasional passive-aggressive message from relatives who clearly didn't know the whole story, but wanted me to make amends. I ignored them. Then, on Monday morning, everything exploded. My cousin sent me a screenshot of Rachel's social media. She had posted a long, emotional rant about how her wedding had been stolen from her by someone who was supposed to be family. It was 3 paragraphs of vague accusations about betrayal and sabotage, ending with, "Some people would rather see me miserable than happy." Normally, the comments on Rachel's posts were full of supportive friends gassing her up. Not this time. People were asking questions. Wait, didn't you have like a year to pay off the venue? Why would your brother be responsible for your wedding bill? Didn't your parents give you money for this already? By the afternoon, Rachel had turned off comments entirely. Later that day, Mom called me, her voice hoarse from crying. She said Rachel had been humiliated, that she had friends dropping out of her bridal party, that the vendors were refusing to work with her because of unprofessional behavior. She said Rachel wasn't leaving the house, that she'd been crying nonstop. I listened quietly, then asked if Rachel had apologized to my son yet. There was a long pause before Mom said, "She's not ready to do that." "Then there's nothing to talk about," I said, and hung up. That night, Dad showed up at my house unannounced. He stood on my porch with his jaw tight, holding something in his hand. A check. He said it was the full amount they had taken from my son's savings. "Consider it paid back," he said gruffly. I asked if Rachel knew they were doing this. He said no, that she still thought she deserved that money. I took the check, but I didn't invite him in. I told him that money would be going directly into my son's education trust, and that from now on there would be no more shared family funds. Dad didn't argue for once. He just nodded and left. The next morning, I got an email from the venue manager. She thanked me again for being such a pleasure to work with and said if I ever wanted to book another event, they'd be happy to offer me a discount for being a respectful client. I laughed when I read it, not out of spite, but because it felt like the universe was putting a stamp on the whole ordeal. A quiet acknowledgement that I had chosen the high road, even if my family couldn't see it. Weeks passed. My app kept growing. My son kept thriving, and my house felt calmer than ever. Rachel, on the other hand, went radio silent. I heard through the grapevine that she had tried to rebook another venue for a much smaller ceremony, but several vendors had blacklisted her after the way she treated them. Apparently, she ended up getting married at the courthouse with just Mom and Dad present. No invitations were sent to me, and honestly, I was fine with that. One Saturday afternoon, a few months later, I was at the park with my son when I saw Mom walking toward us. She looked tired but softer somehow. She said Rachel had finally moved on, but that she still refused to talk to me. Then she did something I didn't expect. She crouched down to my son's level, looked him in the eye, and said, "I'm sorry your birthday was ruined. That should never have happened." My son blinked at her for a moment, then said, "It's okay. Dad got me a better cake." Mom's eyes filled with tears. She stood up, looked at me, and said, "I hope one day you and your sister can work this out." I told her calmly but firmly, "Maybe, but not if it means going back to the way things were." She nodded. For the first time, I think she understood that I wasn't bluffing, that I had built a life outside of their chaos and wasn't going to give that up. As she walked away, my son tugged on my sleeve and said, "Dad, can we go get another cake today? Just because." I smiled, picked him up and said, "Yeah, buddy, let's make it a tradition." And as we walked back to the car, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't dreading the next family gathering, the next phone call, the next demand, because I finally understood something that had taken me 32 years to learn. Peace doesn't come from keeping everyone else happy. It comes from choosing yourself, even when it makes everyone else uncomfortable. And I was done being uncomfortable. That night, I locked the check away in the safe, tucked my son into bed, and sat quietly in the living room with the lights off, feeling lighter than I had in years. Rachel might never forgive me. Mom might never fully get over it. The family might still whisper behind my back at holidays. But my son would grow up knowing that his father never let anyone throw away what mattered to him. Not his cake, not his future, not his dignity. And that, more than anything, felt like home. Now on to the next story. Story 6. I gave my parents $600 a week for a year, but they didn't invite me on family vacation. "We didn't want you there," said my dad. 24 hours later, my phone exploded with missed calls. I should have seen it coming. The signs were always there. How they talked about my sister like she was God's gift to mankind while I was right there. How they always found a way to praise her even when she did nothing. But this was a new level of disrespect. I gave my parents $600 a week for a year. It wasn't easy for me. I wasn't a high roller with disposable income. I worked hard for every dollar and stretched my budget thin to make sure they didn't have to struggle. When my dad got laid off, they acted like it was the end of the world. My mom called me in tears and said they didn't know how they were going to make it. They had bills, food, their mortgage. I couldn't let them go under, so I stepped in. At first, it felt good to help, like I was doing something worthwhile. But the more I gave, the more they seemed to expect. If I sent $600, it was soon, "Mike, things are tight this week. Any chance you could send a little extra?" They'd never come right out and say it, but the guilt trip was always there. I'd check my account and I knew it wasn't smart, but I'd do it anyway because they were my parents, because I thought that's what family did. Meanwhile, my sister Laura was living comfortably in her little bubble. She married a guy with money, which made her a success in my parents' eyes. They never acknowledged that she hadn't worked a day in her life, that her husband's money was the only reason she had it easy. They talked about her like she was a financial genius. "She made smart decisions, Mike. You should learn from her smart choices." The only choice she made was to find a guy willing to bankroll her. But sure, let's all pretend she built her life with her own 2 hands. I never said anything. What was the point? No matter what I did, she was their golden child. I figured as long as she was doing well, I could swallow my pride. Then last week happened. 3 days before, I had invited her over for a cookout. Nothing crazy, just some steaks, a few drinks, a nice evening out, my treat. They immediately turned me down. My mom said they weren't feeling well. I asked if they needed anything and she sighed. "We're just trying to rest. We don't want you to get sick, honey." I hesitated. "Are you sure? I can bring you some food." "Stop, no, don't stop by. But if you could maybe help us out with some medicine? Things have been a little tight this week." I didn't even think twice. I sent them $200 right away. "Thank you, honey. We'll pay you back as soon as we can." That was 3 days ago. The next day, I got a call from my neighbor, Mr. Jenkins. He's an older guy who's always been kind. We talk from time to time, mostly small talk, but this time he mentioned something that made my stomach turn. "I just wanted to let you know that I checked on your folks' house and fed their fish while they were gone." I frowned. "Gone? Where?" "Oh, their trip. They should be back soon. They left 6 days ago." 6 days. I couldn't speak for a second. My mind was racing. "Who are they with?" "Oh, your sister and her husband. Looked like a nice family outing." I don't remember how I ended the call. I just sat there staring at the wall, trying to process it. My parents, the same people who told me they were struggling, who called me every other week asking for extra money, had gone on vacation with Laura and never told me. Not only that, but 3 days ago, when they were already on vacation, they had lied to my face. They had told me that they were sick, they had refused to see me, and they had asked me for money. I sat there feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about every time they'd asked me for help. Every time I'd stressed about my own bills because I wanted to make sure they were okay. Every time they had made me feel like I had to support them while they sat there putting Laura on a pedestal. The next day, they came home and I decided to confront them. I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. I didn't go to their house right away. I needed time to cool down. If I'd shown up the second I found out, I might have said something I couldn't take back. But after a night of tossing and turning, I knew I couldn't let it go, so I drove over the next night. Her car was in the driveway, still covered in dust from the drive back. The porch light was on. I knocked on the door, and after a few seconds, my mom answered. Her face lit up as if nothing had happened. "Oh, Mike, what a nice surprise. We were just sitting down to dinner." I stepped inside. The house was spotless, as if they had done a deep clean before they left. There were fresh flowers on the table. A half-empty suitcase sat by the stairs. It was like walking into a scene from a perfect little family vacation. I took a deep breath. "So, how was the trip?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I saw it. The flicker of guilt in her eyes. She forced a smile. "What trip?" I let out a short laugh. "The one you took with Laura and her husband. The one you lied about." Her expression changed instantly. She glanced toward the kitchen as if hoping my father would intervene. But he didn't. I could hear him moving dishes around, pretending not to hear. I waited. I wanted to give her a chance to explain, to admit it, to say something that would make sense. Instead, she crossed her arms. "I don't understand why you're upset. We don't have to tell you everything we do." I stared at her. "Are you serious? I've been sending you money every week. I paid for that trip without even knowing it, and 3 days ago you told me you were sick. You asked me for money for medicine while you were probably sitting on a beach." Now my father finally decided to get involved. He stepped into the hall with his arms crossed. "Watch your tone." I let out a sharp breath. "You know what? No, I'm not going to watch my tone. I bend over backwards to help you, and you lied to me." My mom sighed dramatically, like I was the one overreacting. "We were just trying to have a nice trip, Mike. Why do you have to make everything about money?" That was it. That was my breaking point. "I hope you enjoyed it," I said. "Because I'm done." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and canceled the automatic transfers right in front of them. My mom's face paled. My dad's jaw clenched. For the first time, they actually looked worried. "Mike, don't be like this," my mom began. "You know things are hard for us." I laughed. "Yeah, they weren't hard enough to keep you from going on vacation." I turned to the door, but before I could leave, my dad said something that stopped me cold. "You're just jealous we didn't invite you." I turned around. "Excuse me." He shrugged, completely unbothered. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're throwing a tantrum because we didn't invite you." I felt my hands tremble. Not with sadness. Not with raw, boiling anger. "That's the difference between me and Laura," I said. "She wouldn't have given you a dime, and you still treat her like she walks on water. I spent a year making sure you were okay, and you don't even respect me enough to be honest." I didn't give her a chance to respond. I walked out, got in my car, and drove away. When I got home, my phone was exploding. Missed calls from my mom, my dad, even Laura. I ignored every one of them, and when I walked in, Anna was sitting on the couch waiting for me. She took one look at me and knew. I sat down next to her, exhaled sharply, and said it out loud. "I'm done giving them money." Anna didn't say anything at first. She just nodded as if she had been waiting for me to finally say it. And to be honest, I think I had been waiting too. For months, I had felt trapped by some unspoken obligation, like I had to take care of her because if I didn't, who would? But that was the thing. I already knew the answer. Laura could have done it. She and her husband had enough money to take a 100 vacations, but somehow I was the one taking out my paycheck every week to make sure our parents were comfortable. And for what? To be treated like a backup plan while she got the golden treatment? Not anymore. Anna leaned back on the couch and crossed her arms. "So what now? You think they'll just take the loss?" I ran a hand over my face. "They'll try to blame me. Maybe send Laura to talk some sense into me. But I don't care. I'm done." And I meant it, or at least I thought I did. The next morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages. That was relentless. I ignored them all. Then around noon, a loud knock echoed through the apartment. Anna shot me a look. "Tell me you didn't invite her." I shook my head and stood up, but before I reached the door, I heard her voice. "Laura's here. Mike, I know you're home. Open the door." I swung it open and there she was, Laura, standing there in a designer outfit, sunglasses pushed up on her head like she had just come from brunch, and right behind her were our parents. I stepped forward just enough to keep them from coming in. "What do you want?" Laura scoffed. "Are you seriously haunting Mom and Dad on vacation?" I let out a dry laugh. "No, I'm cutting them off because they've been lying to me for months, using me like a damn ATM while treating you like royalty. But you already knew that, didn't you?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, you act like they forced you to send money." I clenched my jaw. "They didn't force me, Laura, but they sure as hell manipulated me. The fake sob stories, the guilt trips, the we don't know how we're gonna make it calls. All the while they were pocketing it for vacations with you." My mom finally spoke up. "That's not fair, Mike. We struggled." I raised an eyebrow. "Struggling so much that you needed extra money for medicine while sipping cocktails on the beach?" That quickly shut her up. Laura sighed dramatically. "Look, it's no big deal. Just turn the payments back on and let's all put this behind us." I almost laughed in her face. "You think I'm just going to roll over and keep paying? No, you pay for them." My dad, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly stepped forward. "We don't want your money." I crossed my arms. "Good, because you're not getting it." Laura let out a bitter laugh. "Wow, so you're just going to abandon them now?" Anna, who had been listening from the couch, got up and walked over. "Abandoning them? You mean like they left him, lied to him, used him?" Laura turned to Anna as if she had just noticed her. "Oh great, your opinion." And that's when Anna grabbed Laura's hair. It happened so fast that neither of us had time to react. 1 second Laura was standing there looking smug, and the next Anna had a handful of her perfect, salon-styled hair. "Listen to me very carefully," Anna said, her voice eerily calm. "You and your parents are never coming back here. Mike is done with you, and so am I. Now turn around, get in your overpriced car, and drive away." Laura yelped, hitting Anna's hand until she finally let go. She stumbled back, looking completely outraged. "You're crazy," she shrieked. Anna grinned. "Try me." For the first time, Laura actually looked nervous. She turned back to our parents, expecting them to support her, but they just stood there, silent. I think they finally realized they had lost. Laura huffed, straightened her outfit, and gave me one last look. "You'll regret this." I just smiled. "Not a chance." And with that, she stormed off, our parents trailing behind her like lost puppies. As soon as they were gone, I turned to Anna. She shrugged. "What? She deserved it." I laughed for the first time in days. "Remind me never to piss you off." That was the last time I sent my parents a dime. If Laura was so perfect, she could take care of them. The next morning, my phone rang. I knew who it was before I even looked at it. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up. As soon as I said hello, my mom started, "Mike, I can't believe what happened yesterday. That girlfriend of yours put her hands on your sister. Who does she think she is?" I leaned back in my chair. "You mean when Laura showed up at my door, insulted me, and Anna told her to leave?" My father cut in. "She pulled Laura's hair. That's assault. You need to control your wife." I scoffed. "You need to control your daughter." Anna was just returning the energy that Laura brought to my doorstep. "Mike, we raised you better than this." I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, you also raised me to be your personal bank account. So forgive me if I'm done taking life lessons from you." "You're being disrespectful." My mother whined. "We're your parents." I sighed, already over it. "And I'm an adult who didn't invite you to my house yesterday. You showed up unannounced, got put in your place, and now you're mad about it. You need to put that woman in her place, Mike." My dad snapped. That was it. I let out a sharp laugh. "No, what I need to do is hang up." "Michael, don't you dare." Click. I threw the phone on the table and rubbed my temples. Anna came in from the kitchen holding a cup of coffee. "That bad, huh?" I looked up at her and grinned. "Apparently, I'm supposed to control you." She snorted. "You can't even control your own daughter. Good luck with that." I thought that was the end of it, but 3 hours later there was another knock on the door. A loud, aggressive knocking. I knew who it was before I opened it. Laura was standing there, arms folded, looking furious. But she wasn't alone. Her husband Dan was standing right behind her, and he didn't look angry, he looked dangerous. I barely had time to say, "What the hell do you want?" before he brushed past me and marched straight into my apartment. "You think this is funny?" he growled, jabbing a finger in Anna's direction. "Letting your little girlfriend put her hands on my wife?" Anna stood up, unimpressed. "Your wife ran her mouth in our house." Dan took a step toward her. "Maybe she needs to learn a little respect." Before I realized what I was doing, my fist flew. I caught him right in the jaw and he stumbled back in shock. But I wasn't done. All the frustration, all the anger that had built up over the past year, I let it out punch after punch. I didn't stop. When I stepped back, Dan was on the floor moaning, his face a mess of bruises and swelling. Laura screamed and fell to his side. "Are you crazy?" I shook my hand and glared at her. "You came here looking for a fight. You found one." Dan coughed, wiped some blood from his lip, and looked up at me. "You didn't have to try so hard, man." I leaned down. "You threatened my girlfriend in my own house. If you ever set foot in here again, it'll be worse." Laura helped him up and glared at me. "You just started a war, Mike." I grinned. "No, you did." Dan, still dazed, mumbled, "I'm sorry, man. I shouldn't have." "Too late." I cut him off. "Get out." They left without another word. Anna walked over, looked at my knuckles, and then at the door. "Well," she said, sipping her coffee, "this has escalated." I shook my head and laughed. "No kidding." For the first time in my life, I felt free. No more guilt, no more obligations, no more playing the role of the lesser child who had to prove his worth with money. I was done. After Laura and Dan left, I didn't hear from either of them. No calls, no texts, just silence, and I was okay with that. Anna and I carried on as if nothing had happened. Then 3 days later, my neighbor Mr. Jenkins stopped me as I was walking to my car. "Boy, you sure made a mess of things," he said, shaking his head. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He grinned. "Your parents and your sister had a little, let's call it a disagreement. And when I say little, I mean the whole damn street could hear it. That got my attention." "When?" "Last night. I was outside watering my plants when it started. Your sister drove up, slammed the car door so hard I thought the windows would shatter, and started screaming before she even made it to the porch." I raised an eyebrow. "What were they arguing about?" "Well," Mr. Jenkins said, leaning in as if he were about to tell me the juiciest gossip of the year. I didn't want to pry, but they were yelling so loud I could hear every word, so of course I went over and stood under their window. I laughed. "Of course. Your sister was furious with them. Something about how they should have treated you better and how, if they hadn't been so greedy, you wouldn't have snapped. She kept yelling that it was their fault that you cut them off, and now she had to deal with them." I blinked. "Wait, dealing with them?" Mr. Jenkins grinned. "Yep, that's the best part. Your parents told her she had to start helping them now. That since you wouldn't give them a dime, it was her turn to step up." I burst out laughing. "Oh, it gets better," he said. "She lost it. Started screaming about how she wasn't their bank and how they should have saved money instead of blowing it on vacations. She called her a leech. Oh, and my favorite part. She actually said, 'Why don't you call Mike and apologize so he'll turn the payments back on?' I wiped a tear from my eye. And what did she say? 'Your dad said, we don't want his money anymore. And your mom.' Oh, your mom. She started crying about how you let her down and that family is supposed to help each other. But your sister didn't buy it. She told them, and I quote, 'You don't care about family. You care about who you can squeeze money out of.' Then she stormed out. I shook my head in disbelief. So they lost both of us in 1 week. Looks like it, Mr. Jenkins said. And now you're alone. No golden child, no reliable paycheck. Just the two of them sitting in that house with no one left to feel guilty about helping them." I let out a slow breath and let it all sink in. For years, they had played favorites. They had taken me for granted, used me, dismissed me. And in the end, all it took was one moment of clarity for it all to fall apart. And the best part? I didn't feel bad about it. Not even a little. I looked at Mr. Jenkins and smiled. Well, I guess you finally got what you wanted. How's that? He asked. I turned to my car and opened the door. They wanted Laura to be their golden child. Now they can keep her. And with that, I drove off without a single regret. Update. I thought that was the end of it, I really did. My parents were on their own, Laura was pissed, and I had finally broken free. Life was peaceful. Then, about a week later, I got a text from an unknown number. Mike, it's Dad. Call me back. It's important. I stared at it for a second, debating whether to ignore it, but curiosity won out. I called. He picked up immediately. Mike, listen. I don't want to fight, but we need to talk. I sighed. If this is about money, it's not about money. He cut me off. It's about your sister. That got my attention. What about her? He hesitated. She's getting a divorce. I almost dropped my phone. Wait, what? Dan kicked her out, my dad said. He said he was done supporting her, and now she's back here with us. She has nowhere else to go. I bit back a laugh. You mean the woman who told me to just turn the payments back on is now broke and back in your house? My father sighed heavily. Mike, please. This isn't funny. I leaned back on the couch. It kind of is. There was a long silence. She wants to talk to you, he finally said. I grinned. Not my problem. And I hung up. I guess Laura finally learned what it's like to be on the other side. Now on to the next story. Story 7. Sister said that I stole her money from the wedding, and now the whole family hates me. Days later, I came to the family dinner, showed video proof, and shocked everyone. The wedding day was as beautiful as anyone could have hoped for. My sister, Elizabeth, was radiant in her designer gown, and Brian, her now husband, looked like the happiest man alive. Everything went smoothly. The vows, the champagne toasts, the dancing. If there was any tension, I didn't feel it, at least not until the night after the wedding. The family had gathered at my parents' house to relax and talk about the big day. We were in the middle of rehashing funny moments from the dance floor when Elizabeth stood up dramatically, her voice shaking as she announced something that hit me like a truck. John stole our honeymoon money, $110,000. It's gone. The room fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes turn to me. My brain couldn't process what she had just said. Stole? It was absurd. Before I could even defend myself, Elizabeth went on and on and on. She talked about how devastated she was, how she'd been crying all day, and how betrayed she felt. Brian sat frozen, looking like he'd been hit by a freight train. My parents, however, immediately sprang into action to support her. John, how could you do this? My mother said, shaking her head in disappointment. You ruined everything. Steal from your sister? Your own sister. Dad added. You're not welcome here anymore. I tried to speak up to explain that I hadn't touched a dime. I pointed out that I had been at the front desk all night in full view of everyone and that I didn't even know where the money was kept. Brian, to his credit, seemed unsure, even saying, I don't think John would do something like that. But Elizabeth wasn't having it. Stop defending him, Brian, she snapped. He's lying. I can't believe you take his side over mine. John, you're disgusting. Get out of my sight. I was stunned. The anger in her voice wasn't just about the alleged theft. It was personal. My parents joined her in telling me that I was no longer part of the family. You are no longer our son, my father said, and that was the final blow. I exchanged glances with Brian, who looked as confused as I felt, and then I left. As I drove away, I began to put things together. I knew exactly why she was doing this. It wasn't about the money, it was about our grandmother. Grandma had made it clear a few months earlier that she intended to leave me most of her inheritance. She believed I would use it wisely and take care of the family legacy. Elizabeth, the self-proclaimed golden child, was furious. She had tried to convince Grandma that she deserved the money instead, but it hadn't worked. Now that Grandma's health was failing, Elizabeth was desperate to make me look like the bad guy. It was her way of sabotaging me. I was angry, but I also knew this wasn't over. If she was going to play dirty, I could play dirtier. I had a secret of my own, one I'd kept to protect Brian. Elizabeth had been cheating on him for months. I hadn't planned on exposing her, but after what she'd done, all bets were off. I began to plan my revenge. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Elizabeth had done. The betrayal hurt, but what hurt even more was the fact that my parents believed her without a second thought. I couldn't even look at my phone because the family group chat exploded with texts about how I had let everyone down and how ashamed they were of me. It was as if Elizabeth had flipped a switch and suddenly I was the family villain. But I wasn't going to let her win. Elizabeth thought she could destroy me and walk away unscathed. What she didn't know was that I had been sitting on a bombshell for months. Back in August, I'd accidentally caught her with someone who wasn't Brian. I'd gone to a coffee shop in the next town to meet a friend, and there she was, sitting in a corner booth, holding hands with some guy I didn't recognize. They weren't exactly subtle, kissing, laughing, acting like a full-fledged couple. I didn't say anything at the time because, honestly, it wasn't any of my business. I figured it would come back to bite her eventually. I just never expected it to be me who'd have to bite back. Now, I needed proof, something solid, something undeniable. I knew her routine well enough. She'd always claimed she was visiting a friend or running errands when she disappeared for a few hours each week. It didn't take a genius to figure out what she was really doing. My best guess was Thursday around 7 p.m. That seemed to be her usual window. So, I parked my car down the street from her house and waited. Sure enough, just after 6:45, Elizabeth walked out, got into her car, and drove away. I followed her, keeping a good distance so she wouldn't notice. She went to the same coffee shop where I'd seen her before. The guy was waiting for her in the parking lot. I parked discreetly across the street and started recording. They hugged, then they kissed, and not a quick peck. This was the kind of kiss that made it clear that Brian wasn't even a thought in her head. They went inside and sat by the window, looking like a couple on a romantic date. The guy kept leaning in close, touching her arm, whispering in her ear. Elizabeth ate it up. I recorded the whole thing, 7 minutes of golden footage that would turn the whole situation on its head. When they finally left, I made sure to catch them hugging again before they got into separate cars and drove away. I waited until she was long gone before I drove home. My heart was pounding all the way home, but it wasn't nerves. It was anticipation. I knew I had something that would shatter her perfect little facade, but I wasn't going to rush into it. I had to wait for the right moment. Elizabeth had gone nuclear on me at a family gathering, so it was only fitting that I returned the favor. I decided to set up a dinner a few days later and pretend to apologize and make amends. My parents, still angry with me, reluctantly agreed. Elizabeth didn't hesitate to accept, probably thinking it would be her chance to humiliate me further. Little did she know what was coming. The days leading up to the dinner were excruciating. I stayed completely quiet even as Elizabeth continued to throw barbs in the family group chat about how some people can't take responsibility for their actions. My parents ate it up, of course. Every time I saw a text pop up from them saying something like, "We are so proud of you, Elizabeth, for handling this with grace," I wanted to scream, but I kept my cool. I knew it would be worth it. The morning of the dinner, I texted everyone in the family group chat, including Brian. I said I wanted to meet for dinner and clear the air. "I owe everyone an explanation," I wrote, "and I need to apologize, especially to you, Brian." My mother replied first, saying they'd be there but that I'd better have a damn good reason for what I'd done. Elizabeth chimed in with a sarcastic remark about how she hoped I was ready to confess. Brian's response was short and neutral, just a thumbs-up emoji. Perfect. Everything was falling into place. I spent the day getting ready. I loaded the video onto my laptop and tested it to make sure the quality was good. I also printed out screenshots, just in case anyone tried to accuse me of faking the footage. When I arrived at my parents' house for dinner, I felt like I was going into a battle, and I was ready to win. The atmosphere was tense as I walked in. My parents barely acknowledged me, and Elizabeth sat at the head of the table, looking smug as ever. Brian was next to her, quiet and reserved as he had been since the accusation. I didn't know if he believed I had stolen the money or not, but he was clearly keeping his thoughts to himself. We all sat down and I began by taking a deep breath. First of all, I want to say that I'm sorry for how things turned out. I know you're all angry with me, and I understand why. But I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I realize there's something I should have said sooner, something I've been holding back. Elizabeth leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright with anticipation. She probably thought I was going to confess. My mom and dad just stared, waiting. Brian looked uncomfortable. I pulled out my laptop, put it on the table, and opened the video file. What you're about to see is not easy to watch, I said. But I think it's important for everyone here to know the truth. Elizabeth's smug expression faltered for the first time as I pressed play. The room fell silent as the video began. It showed her walking up to the guy in the coffee shop parking lot, hugging him, kissing him, the date in the coffee shop, the way they couldn't keep their hands off each other, and then the last shot, them hugging again in the parking lot before they drove away. The video ended, and for a few seconds no one said a word. Then Brian spoke. "Who the hell is that?" he asked, his voice sharp. Elizabeth's face flushed. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Answer him," I said. "You accused me of stealing, of tearing this family apart, when all along you were the one who was lying. This isn't your friend, is it? How long has this been going on?" Elizabeth stammered, but Brian didn't wait for her to answer. He pushed back his chair and stood up, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You've been cheating on me?" he said. "The whole time I was working my ass off to give you the life you wanted. The Maldives, the car, all of it. For this?" My parents looked like they'd been hit by a truck. My mother turned to Elizabeth, her voice shaking. "Elizabeth, is this true?" Elizabeth finally managed to speak. "It's not what it looks like," she said, but no one believed her. "This will be a lesson to you, Elizabeth," I said, standing up. "You started this war. All I did was finish it." Brian grabbed his keys and left without another word. My parents, still in shock, turned on me. "How could you do this to her?" my father said. "Me?" I shot back. "She accused me of stealing 10 grand to make me look bad. And I'm the bad guy for showing the truth? You should ask her how far she's willing to go to cover up her lies." I didn't wait for an answer. I grabbed my stuff and left. I wasn't sticking around to hear any more excuses. They wanted a villain, and now they had one. But this time it wasn't me. After the dinner, I didn't hear from anyone in my family for days. No texts, no phone calls, no attempts to explain or apologize. It was radio silence. I figured they were probably trying to clean up the mess Elizabeth had made. The first person to reach out wasn't even the family. It was Brian. He called me 2 days after the dinner, and frankly, I was surprised. He wanted to talk. I thought he might be mad at me for blindsiding him like that, but he didn't sound mad at all. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "for being honest. I wish it hadn't come to this, but I'm glad I know." We talked for a while, and he told me he'd already started making arrangements to move out of the house he shared with Elizabeth. He also mentioned that he'd canceled their trip to the Maldives and stopped making payments on the car he'd promised to buy her. "She can figure out her own life now," he said. I asked him if Elizabeth had tried to talk to him since the dinner. "She's been blowing up my phone, begging me to understand," he said. "But there's nothing to understand. She cheated. End of story." Hearing him say that gave me a strange sense of closure. At least someone in this whole mess was seeing things clearly. A few days later, my mom finally contacted me. She sent me a long, guilty text message about how disappointed she was in me for ruining Elizabeth's relationship and how families should always support each other no matter what. I stared at the message for a while, trying to decide if it was even worth responding to. In the end, I sent back a short reply. "Family supports each other by telling the truth, not by covering up lies. Maybe you should think about that." That didn't go over well. My dad followed up with a message telling me I was being immature and that Elizabeth was still their little girl, no matter what she'd done. It was ridiculous. They were willing to overlook her cheating and manipulation just because she was their favorite. Meanwhile, Elizabeth remained silent. Not a word from her. I didn't know if she was too ashamed to speak or if she was planning her next move, but either way, I didn't care. She'd lost her fiancé, her free trip to the Maldives, and probably most of the sympathy she'd soaked up from my parents. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Elizabeth wasn't the type to admit defeat. If she was quiet, it was because she was plotting, and I wasn't wrong. A week later, she made her move. I woke up one morning to a barrage of texts from mutual friends and extended family. Apparently, Elizabeth had begun to spread a new story, that I had set her up to ruin her wedding and sabotage her relationship. She claimed that I had been following her for weeks trying to catch her slipping, and that the video was just a desperate attempt to get back at her for exposing the alleged theft. It was absurd, but the damage was done. Some people bought her story, especially those who didn't know the whole story. They started texting me, calling me petty and vindictive. Others, thankfully, saw through her lies and told me they believed me. But I wasn't going to sit back and let them control the narrative. I had all the evidence, the video, the screenshots, the texts. If she wanted a public fight, I was ready. But before I could make a move, something unexpected happened. Brian stepped in. He posted a long message on social media that addressed everything. He explained the cheating, the accusations, the dinner, and even my role in exposing the truth. "John didn't ruin our relationship," he wrote. "Elizabeth did that all by herself. He just showed me what I needed to see. If anyone has a problem with him, take it up with me." The post went viral among our circle of friends and family. It shut down most of Elizabeth's supporters overnight. People started reaching out to me, apologizing for jumping to conclusions. Even my parents went quiet for a while, probably realizing how bad they looked by taking her side so blindly. But Elizabeth? She doubled down. Her next move would take things to a whole new level. Elizabeth's next move was as bold as it was stupid. She tried to sue me for slander. Yes, you read that right. She actually hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit claiming that I had intentionally destroyed her reputation and caused her emotional distress. When I was served with the papers, I couldn't decide whether to laugh or get angry. She wasn't just desperate. She was delusional. I didn't waste any time. I hired my own lawyer, showed them the video, the texts, and Brian's social media posts, and they immediately said I had nothing to worry about. "This is a scare tactic," they told me. "But if she wants to go to court, we'll go to court." And so we did. The court date was about a month later. Most of the family showed up, probably out of morbid curiosity. Brian was there too, sitting quietly in the back. Elizabeth arrived with her lawyer, looking smug and confident, as if she'd already won. The judge wasn't impressed. Her lawyer argued that I had maliciously recorded and distributed private footage of Elizabeth, causing her to lose her relationship and social standing. But my lawyer immediately shut that down. They pointed out that the footage was taken in a public place and showed behavior that directly contradicted Elizabeth's previous accusations against me. They also pointed out that I'd only shown the video to our immediate family until Elizabeth's lies forced the situation into the public eye. Then came the best part. Brian took the stand. He testified that Elizabeth had accused me of stealing without evidence and tried to alienate me from the family. He confirmed that the video was the only reason he'd learned the truth about her cheating. "John didn't ruin anything," he said. "He saved me from wasting my life on someone who didn't respect me or our relationship." Elizabeth's lawyer tried to cross-examine him, but Brian didn't flinch. He stuck to the facts and left no room for interpretation. When it was Elizabeth's turn to testify, her story completely fell apart. She contradicted herself several times, claiming at one point that the man in the video was just a friend, and at another point that she and Brian were on a break when it happened. The judge wasn't buying any of it. By the end of the hearing, it was clear where things were headed. The judge dismissed the case, ruling that I hadn't defamed Elizabeth and that the evidence I had presented was both truthful and relevant. But the real kicker came when the judge scolded Elizabeth directly. "You have wasted this court's time with baseless accusations," she said. "It is clear that this lawsuit was an attempt to deflect blame for your own actions. I urge you to reflect on the decisions that led you here today." Elizabeth left the courtroom in tears. After that, the tables were turned. No one, not my parents, not our extended family, not even her closest friends, would have anything to do with her lies. Brian cut off all contact and completed the process of moving out. My parents, humiliated and ashamed, finally admitted they'd been wrong to take her side. It wasn't a dramatic apology, just a quiet acknowledgement. When my father called me one night and said, "We made a mistake. I hope one day you can forgive us," I told him I'd think about it, and I meant it. Forgiveness wasn't going to be easy after everything they put me through. As for Elizabeth, she completely disappeared from the family scene. She moved out of state a few weeks later, claiming she needed a fresh start. From what I've heard, she's struggled to keep friends or a job ever since. Her reputation followed her, as it should have. I won't pretend that this whole ordeal hasn't left scars. It has. But in the end, the truth prevailed, and I was finally free of the cloud Elizabeth had tried to hang over me. I don't regret exposing her. She started the war and she paid the price. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.